Hello everyone, welcome on into another stream. Hope you're all doing well. So yesterday actually took a lot of time, more so than I expected. This seems to be a recurring trend, one that I'm not terribly fond of, but it's alright. We watched Bob the Hollow's comments and tips for lore hunting video and Smowtown's choir and eldritch truth video about Bloodborne. So Astanex, Chubby Owl, Eric Williams, nice to see you all again. Shadow Sykes, welcome into the stream. If you guys can hear in the background, some fireworks are going off, and my dog is very scared of them. So I might get interrupted intermittently by the dog, but hopefully it's not too bad. So anyway, we're going to continue on today with V-Limit's video about Vargram, and then Vacuous Zealot had requested we look at the Garrulous Goldmask video and why the Goldmask ending is the best choice in Elden Ring. And I was thinking of saving a 2-hour Smo video for maybe its own stream, so we'll probably skip this one for now and maybe do the Claymen, Relics of the Ancient Dynasty, and or maybe the Tarnished Archaeologists video after that. So I'm just going to move this down here just to give you guys a good look at what's coming up next. It's Goldmask time. What does the wet part of the wet nurse mean? I can't tell if that's a joke, but I'm just going to treat it as not a joke in case anybody ever has the question. A wet nurse is a woman who isn't necessarily the biological mother of a child, but she will nurse it directly herself. And nurse is nursing a child means feeding it one's breast milk. And I might make a video about it in the future, although it's kind of been years now since I've really made a proper Bloodborne video. But I think like the wet nurse could be analogous to a kind of ghost kind of demon thing in Japanese culture that's kind of related to birds and stealing children. But it's not like a super widespread myth. It seems like pretty regionalized. But I do think that might have been part of the inspiration for Murgo's Wet Nurse. Hey Rat, nice to see you again. Oh, it wasn't a joke? Okay. Pole, nice to see you as well. Oh no. Doggy is trying to climb me. Oof. So, he's literally trying to, like, climb into my lap, which he doesn't really do. He's just really frightened of the fireworks that are going off right now. Okay. This is going to be a long night. I forget this time of year is really taxing on our mentalities here. Anyway, hope you guys are all doing well and sheltered from any fireworks in your life. And happy Father's Day if you celebrate. Rat didn't know about the Murgo Wet Nurse myth and can see the parallels really well. Alright, so we'll go into this next video by V-Limit. I actually have watched this video. I think this might be the only one that I've really watched, despite what they look like here on this entire playlist here. So he wanted feedback for this video, and I really enjoyed the very few videos of V-Limits that I've seen. He edits extremely well, so I'm going to just kind of give him praise. And it's because of V-Limit that I felt motivated to keep working on my gold and silver video and make it a bit more cinematic than I may have initially left it. So excited to dive into this video and share it with you guys if you haven't seen it yet as well. So, the story of Vargram the Raging Wolf, Elden Ring lore by V-Limits.
If you've paid any attention to Elden Ring's marketing, then you've probably seen this character a few times before. This is Vargram, the Raging Wolf. Or it's at least someone wearing his armor set. Either way, Vargram is basically a mascot for Elden Ring, but there's a bit of a disconnect between that and his role in the actual game. On top of being tied to an optional quest, it's possible to get locked out of ever meeting him depending on how you progress. Still, despite how small of a role he's given, Vargram's story helps highlight some of the most important events in the history of the Lands Between. I'll try my...
Alright, so ever since I got into content creation, one thing that I've paid more attention to is obviously like video editing and stuff. And to me, one thing that I think really separates a great video from just kind of like a good or like a normal quality video is the ability to feel so seamless that you're kind of forgetting that it's edited at all, that it's like a video. It just draws you in. And I think VLimit does such a fantastic job with his video transitions. I think the dude should almost be like a full-time editor, to be honest. So just to like go back to some of his visual effects, and I'll talk about some of his content because it's kind of easy to get distracted by all that. Like, it really does take a lot of work to layer in all these individual elements, and as well as like the borders and stuff. So this stuff isn't super obvious on its own unless you're like kind of in the know for this stuff. So I think this is honestly like literally professional level editing.
Probably seen this character a few times before. This is Vargram, the Raging Wolf.
Like this, I have no idea how he made
It's
that.
at least someone wearing his armor set. Either way, Vargram is basically a mascot for Elden Ring, but
And he's right that he's kind of like one of the mascots for Elden Ring. The reason why I've always used Vargram, the Raging Wolf's armor set is because it was used in the promotional materials. I also just really like the look of it. It's a pretty clean looking set. Although I'm not as fond of it with the cloak on it, I just prefer the altered form, which is what they used in the promo stuff.
there's a bit of a disconnect between that and his role in the actual game. On top of being tied to an optional quest, it's possible to get locked out of ever meeting him depending on how you progress. Still, despite how small of a role he's given, Vargram's story helps highlight some of the most important events in the history of the Lands Between. I'll try my best to cover everything that can be learned from him, so of course, there will be spoilers ahead. The first mention of Vargram actually dates all the way back to Elden Ring's closed network test. Instead of the 10 classes that are available in the full release, the network test only included 5 options: Warrior, Enchanted Knight, Prophet, Champion, and Bloody Wolf.
So yeah, I didn't get selected to do the network test, unfortunately, and I don't know what those differences are. And I keep saying I should look into a lot of these differences, and I still haven't done it yet. So this is just kind of a good reminder for me to do that, because this is something I didn't know.
Warrior,
So I
Enchanted
first
Knight,
learned about
Prophet,
it from this
Champion,
video
and Bloody
specifically, that the network test had these kind of like 5 subclasses, and this is what they were. You like that the lines aren't perfectly clean. They're dirty like pictures in a book, and that takes forever to edit. Props to V. As long as you like know what you're doing with the effects, and you know what you're doing editing, like it kind of, you can streamline the process so it's not that terrible. But I mean, the real gargantuan effort comes into like just learning all that stuff to be able to do it so fluidly like he does. Mercy, nice to see you again. And yeah, Paul, we will be watching a bit of Tarnished Archaeologist videos. They're very highly requested.
That last one starts with the Bloody Wolf helm, armor, gauntlets, and greaves.
I see the shoes.
They all describe how Vargram was one of the first Tarnished to visit the Round Table Hold, which is interesting because we know so little about the Round Table's creation. We're told it's a gathering place of Tarnished that exists outside of the world, but an abandoned, physical version of it called the Fortified Manor can be found in the royal capital, kind of like how the Hunter's Dream worked in Bloodborne. It's possible that there's a sort of recreation or remembrance of the Round Table being sustained by the Erd Tree, but that's not too important to cover for now, since this video is more focused on Vargram himself. His armor also tells us that according to the old legends, wolves are the shadows of the Empyrean, and this is what Vargram aspired to be. This refers to the relation between an Empyrean and their shadow-bound beast. The Empyreans are these sort of divine individuals that are often chosen by the Two Fingers for a specific purpose. These include Queen Marika, who would become the vessel for the Elden Ring, along with a few of her offspring, being Ranni, Miquella, and Malenia, who were all chosen as candidates to lead the coming age. Ranni and Marika were given their own shadow-bound beasts in the forms of Blythe and Malekith, and Blythe's side.
And I just kind of want to go back because I think that's just such good visual juxtaposition right there. I really do. I don't think I can say enough about like how well his videos are edited for just like one individual working on these kinds of things.
Beasts in the forms of Blythe and Malekith, and Blythe's side quest gives a little bit more insight into how these relations work.
Blythe is Lady Ranni's stepbrother. Ranni's mother Queen Renala approved of him, and they played like siblings from childhood. The two fingers gave Blythe to Lady Rani as a faithful follower, her very shadow.
While Blythe is called Rani's stepbrother, Malekith, on the other hand, is supposedly Marika's half-brother. While this makes it sound like they share a blood.
So that's a little bit of a translation thing. The Japanese uses the same characters for both. And I might have made a short about that. I don't remember. But if not, I should. That Marika and Malekith are called like step siblings, sort of. The same way that Rani is referred, or like Blythe is referred in relation to Rani. So I think they're supposed to be like directly analogous, which is a little bit unfortunate that it doesn't come through quite as cleanly in English.
Blood relation. It's worth noting that in the Japanese version, both relationships are described using the same kanji.
Obviously, I forgot that he put that in the video, but yep, he's right there. Whoops.
I don't really know what to make of this being translated in different ways, just thought I should point it out. Now, Vargram is obviously not an.
So that's just kind of a thing that can happen, because sometimes translating things a little bit too literally is just unintuitive. Like sometimes you might just go with the first word that pops into your head, even if it isn't like strictly 100% accurate to the original text. And that's just kind of like human error sometimes. Like English is a lot more fluid in terms of like how they refer to familiar relations than Japanese and like Korean, and I'm assuming Chinese as well, because yeah, those are kind of similar culturally. So like in Japanese and Korean, you very clearly specify between like older brother, older sister, younger sister. Korean is especially crazy when you like start referring to aunts and uncles and relations once removed and stuff like that, and I don't even remember like half the stuff of that anymore. But in English, we really just have like brother, sister, uncle, niece, and nephew, and we just kind of leave it vague beyond that. So yeah, this is just kind of a thing that can just happen in translation sometimes. Just being a little bit careless maybe, but I also don't want to completely trash on them. Hey Clown, nice to see you again. And El Degusto, you're here almost on time. Would you miss? We just started the Vargram video about V-Limits Vargram video at least. Chinese is very specific about age and whether they're matrilineal and patrilineal. Yeah, and that stuff just kind of blows my mind.
Actual wolf like Blythe or Malekith, but this relation between an Empyrean and their Shadowbound is occasionally reflected in other non-wolf creatures, like how a Bloodhound Knight will serve one master for their whole life, or how Sarash was loyal to Godfrey and his lineage. So maybe Vargram just wanted to play a similar role.
Terrible audio splice here, but I'm too lazy to fix it. Okay, so he must have actually put in his own closed captioning. I respect the hustle. Now I'm gonna pay attention to the audio thing here. Oops, wait, why didn't it go back?
Sarash was of creatures, like how a Bloodhound Knight will serve one master for their whole life, or how Sarash was loyal to Godfrey and his lineage. So maybe Vargram just wanted to play a similar role to the Shadowbound, or maybe he had a plan to somehow become an actual beast himself. Either way, his end goal was to serve an Empyrean, but now the question is, which Empyrean did Vargram have in mind? Rani and Marika already have their own shadows, and the twins Mikola and Melania seem to be pretty far removed from the whole system after the shattering. But there's actually a fifth Empyrean that we haven't covered yet. One incantation describes how the Godskin Apostles, whose black flames once had the power to slay a god, were led by a character called the Gloam-Eyed Queen, who's said to have been an Empyrean chosen by the Fingers. She also used to be called the Dusk-Eyed Queen, but that name was basically retconned out in a later patch. The Gloam-Eyed Queen cradles newborn apostles swaddled in cloth made from skin sewn together, and soon they will grow to become the death of the gods. There's a lot more to her story and how Vargram could have been involved in it, but for now, let's look at how Vargram's role plays out in the actual game. The Bloody Wolf is no longer a starting class, and to even meet Vargram, you'll have to explore.
One thing that I haven't touched on yet that I really appreciate about V-Limit's videos is how he's able to splice humor into it in a very natural, unforced kind of way. Whereas I think his vocal delivery and my vocal delivery are typically pretty dry. So I just admire the fact that he's able to keep his a lot more like lighthearted and entertaining in that way. Whereas I feel maybe it's just because like the style of content I produce, it just doesn't lend itself to that way. Although I think that's probably not a fair comparison. If I tried, I could probably be better at it. But I think he has a real knack for this regardless, with just like the memes and stuff. And also, to be fair, it takes a lot more work editing that stuff in, and I kind of hate it. So you could chalk it up to a little bit of laziness on my part. But yeah, he definitely goes above and beyond in the production of these videos.
Mount Gelmir and find the recusants of the Volcano Manor.
So, Tarnished, have you ever harbored doubts about the burden of grace and the dogmatic ramblings of the Fingers? If you have, why not join the Volcano Manor? Rise with us against the Erd Tree.
Being enemies of the Erd Tree, of course, makes the Manor generally opposed to the Two Fingers, but even as a member of the Round Table, they'll allow you to join their forces. And there's definitely no ulterior motive here. You'll soon receive letters detailing targets for assassination. The first of these is described as one of a few wizened Tarnished who survived to this day, and the second uses tools from a time when those who strayed from guidance feared nothing more than the utter silence of the Round Table Hold assassins.
So, you've bloodied your sword in the hunt. Then I shall introduce myself. Banal, a recusant just like you. Take this, a special invitation.
El Degusto says, I sound good off the cuff, but when reading from a script, I sound like I'm reading from a script in front of a class or something. And yes, that's also been a bit of a deliberate move on my part. I mean, I've tried to improve and sound a bit more natural over time, but the reason why I do that is because I know a decent size of my audience are from English as second language speakers, or third or whatnot, so non-native English speakers. So I try to deliberately slow down how I talk, and right now I'm kind of doing it a little bit, but because I slow down so much, it kind of makes it difficult for me to read in a way that's natural and rises and falls in a pleasing manner or anything like that. So it's a skill that I need to work on, and it's something that I've like been steadily improving over time, especially when you compare my very first videos to what I produced more recently. But anyway, yeah, I see what you're saying with that.
It seems like the Tarnished from the early days of the Round Table are the Manor's primary targets, and this letter, addressed to Bernal, actually details two names that fall under this: errant sorcerer Wilhelm and Vargram, the Raging Wolf. His title of Bloody Wolf from the network test is gone now, probably to minimize confusion with things like the Bloody Fingers and the Blood Star. At some point, Wilhelm was led by guidance into confrontation with his friend Vargram, and it is said he was then taken prisoner in Round Table Hold. There's a good chance that Wilhelm was imprisoned for his study of the primeval current, a forbidden tradition that involved transforming sorcerers into graven masses to form the seeds of stars. Just like Vargram, Wilhelm was one of the first Tarnished to visit the Round Table Hold, which makes it pretty fitting that you and Bernal invade their world where the physical version of the Round Table is found.
Let us tread the path of the recusant together, till we reach the miserable death that awaits us.
El Degusto says Vargar is Germanic/Norse for literally wolf. I didn't know that. That's kind of a cool detail there. Thanks for sharing that, El Degusto. Rat says Protag slows his voice so that he doesn't sound like he's singing Rap God. I don't speak that quickly, but I do know that I tend to speak quickly enough and slur my words together and not enunciate very well. So that makes things more difficult for sure. So having to slow things down is more difficult, and as well as like doing the actual voice recording stuff, one thing that's also really annoying to have to deal with is what's called like mouth noise. So if you're like speaking and you make like random clicks in the background with your mouth or things like that, if you inhale or exhale too loudly, it can just kind of mess with the flow of things. So there's a lot of really minute details that you have to deal with while speaking for voice recording, and my goal is to be like legible. So there's pros and cons. Like by doing that, I think I'm helping out my audience at large and just kind of suffering for like speed as a byproduct of that. But I'm willing to live with it and just kind of improve incrementally as we go along here. So going back to like this video, one of the interesting things to me about Willem and Vargram is that both of their guidance of graces are kind of like led them to this point to keep them in a stalemate. And I don't think I made a short about this. Maybe I did, but the Japanese, for the way that Willem and Vargram are prisoner in the Round Table Hold is a little bit different. And it's not necessarily that they're like literal prisoners. It's more like they're circumstantial prisoners because they're kind of locked in a stalemate fighting one another is what it's saying. So these two are fighting each other because their guidance of graces brought them over here. And going back to that idea of like the guidance of grace, it does really fascinate me that Wilhelm and his guidance of grace caused him to look into the primeval current, because that's just kind of a crazy thing, because like our grace guides us to become the Elden Lord, so it's not like we all have the same end destination, because like Nefeli ends up abandoning her guidance of grace, Blackguard loses sight of his like Roger, so kind of interesting stuff here. But it doesn't really ever get expanded upon, unfortunately.
Whatever their previous conflict was, these two must now work together against the common enemy of the Recusants. Wilhelm's weapon of choice is the Staff of Loss, focusing on spells used by the assassins of Celia, and Vargram uses the Godslayer's Greatsword, the sacred sword of the Gloam-Eyed Queen.
We Recusants must become the most wretched of predators. All you can do is laugh. Oh, greater will, hear my voice. I am the recusant Bernal, inheritor of my brother's will, and you will fall to my blade. Consider this fair warning.
So yeah, Vargram doesn't have that big of a role in this game, but if we can get our hands on the same weapon that he used, it can provide a bit more insight on how he fits into Elden Ring's greater story. Within Caelid's Divine Tower, down in its basement, past a Black Flame monk and guarded by a Godskin apostle, a single chest holds the legendary Godslayer's Greatsword, sacred sword of the Gloam-Eyed Queen, who controlled the Godskin apostles before her defeat at the hands of Malekith. The black flames wielded by the apostles are channeled from this sword. That part about Malekith is a key.
And the fact that the Vargram that we face in the Round Table Hold or Fortified Manor uses the Godslayer's Greatsword is really vexing to me as well, because it's really questionable what the identity of the Gloam-Eyed Queen is, because if she is supposed to be the sword, why are there multiple ones of them? Is this just like a kind of multiverse thing? I think that's probably the most likely explanation, but I think it's still kind of dissatisfying no matter what.
Key point for piecing together the final story. Marika, the god of the Golden Order, is associated with the Elden Ring, the Erd Tree, and life itself, while the Gloam-Eyed Queen is associated with Black Flame and Destined Death. In this way, these two characters are sort of opposing reflections of the other, but the one huge imbalance between them is Marika's access to a shadow-bound beast. Marika's sole need of Malekith was as a vessel to lock away Destined Death, but the Gloam-Eyed Queen presumably had no shadow of her own to oppose him. Vargram may have wanted to take this role. Of course, all of these assumptions only work if the Gloam-Eyed Queen is in fact the Empyrean mentioned in the Raging Wolf set, but I think that's the strongest conclusion considering the limited evidence we're given. Whatever the case, the god.
So yeah, I kind of agree with Willem here, where the simplest explanation would be that Vargram wanted to be the Gloam-Eyed Queen's Shadowhound beast, but just because it is the simplest, that doesn't mean it's true. And you know, that's kind of what's it called? Occam's razor, where the simplest explanation is most likely to be correct, but we've seen time and time again where FromSoft games really throw a wrench into that theory and turn it upside down. And one example that I always point to kind of talk about this would be in Bloodborne. Before the DLC was released, many people believed that Lawrence was the bloodletting beast down in the final layers of the Chalice dungeons, because there's like a wound on the skull of the bloodletting beast, which is kind of similar to how Lawrence's skull is cracked open in the Grand Cathedral's altar. And in addition to that, some people also believed that Ludwig, the Holy Blade, was the forgotten madman in the Hintertomb chalices, because he uses Ludwig's rifle as well as Ludwig's Holy Blade. So that could have been a good connection to make, and a very, like, it would have been like the simplest conclusion one could come to before the DLC dropped, and then they just kind of turned those theories around. So I do appreciate V-Limit putting a limit on the speculation here and saying that it's the most simple theory, but it isn't necessarily set in stone. So kudos to him for that. You still think it's Lawrence, not gonna lie.
God-slaying power of the Black Flame has been lost since her defeat, and it looks like Vargram never achieved his goal of becoming a shadow. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
How would you like to earn the strength of beasts?
Hey, thanks for stopping by.
Alright, that was a good video by V-Limit. I've already liked it, because that is one that I've seen. And I guess I should do everyone a solid and turn off my add-on about the dislike counter. Anyway, I'm not going to worry about that too much. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you liked it, go ahead and give him a visit. I'm going to post it into the chat. And I think it's already in the video description. So go ahead and give him a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video and watching it with me as well. And I guess, you know, since I'm really bad at doing calls to actions, I'd appreciate it if you liked this video as well. Man, I feel really scummy asking for that, but I still need to do it more to pump up those numbers. Alright, so good job, V-Limit. I really enjoyed the video, and I am probably going to look at some more of your videos throughout this streaming process that I do. So if you have any suggestions that you want me to watch next, just let me know.
Hey, thanks for stopping.
Too late, already liked both. Thanks, Astanex. Cosmos has some interesting takes. Keep the dislike counter, it's cool. Tarnished Archaeologist when? Muramasa, welcome to the stream. He will be a little bit later today. I think we have like 2 more videos to go through before him. Or yeah, just this one and the next, and then TA. Alright, so next we have The Goldmask ending is the best choice in Elden Ring by Garrulous Goldmask himself. And I'm already a bit disappointed because I've already heard a voice in the first 2 seconds of this clip. But all joking aside, I haven't watched anything by Garrulous Goldmask yet. So hopefully this is a good video. I would say that the Goldmask ending is the ending that I understand the least. So if he could be so kind as to enlighten me, I would be much obliged. So let's go ahead and jump on in.
Hey, thanks for stopping by. Today I'll explain why the Goldmask ending is the best ending in Elden Ring. So even though the Tarnished doesn't get to go on a honeymoon with a puppet, the rest of the lands between would be much better off under the Age of Order. That said, there are quite a few mistranslations and misconceptions for the Goldmask ending, which could explain why it hasn't gotten as much buzz as the others. So to figure out what happens in the Goldmask ending, let's start with the Mending Rune of Perfect Order. The Mending Rune is a rune of transcendental ideology, which will attempt to perfect the Golden Order. The current imperfection of the Golden Order, or instability of ideology, can be blamed upon the fickleness of the gods no better than men. That is the fly in the ointment. There are a few subtle differences lost in translation. First, there's no mention of ideology in the original Japanese text, a term that carries a lot of baggage. Instead, the kanji used is better translated as viewpoint or perspective, so transcendental ideology should be read as transcendental viewpoint. Thanks to Redditor Sonic Flanick for pointing this out. So by acting as a transcendental viewpoint, the Mending Rune of Perfect Order would effectively provide a God's eye view of the world, And you can even make the argument that the rune itself does look like a golden eye. And unlike Fear and Dung Eater, who gestated their mending runes, Goldmask discovered the mending rune of perfect order. To me, this distinction emphasizes the truly transcendental nature of what Goldmask found. It also overcomes what Goldmask identified as the fatal conceit in the current Golden Order, the fickleness of the gods. It's not hard to see why. Marika tried to destroy the Elden Ring, while Radagon attempted to repair it. And of course, Radagon is Marika. Radagon also waged war against Renala, but repented. Then he married Renala, but then left her. During the Age of the Crucible, the Omen and the Misbegotten were valued as almost holy for their horns and other aspects of the Crucible, but now they're denigrated for those very same attributes. Likewise, the Crucible Knights were valiant soldiers for Godfrey, then they were shunned. The Japanese text is even more blunt with this condemnation. The item description can also be translated as the imperfection of the present Golden Order was the fluctuation in perspective. There was no need for gods with hearts like men.
Alright, so I'm probably going to need to, like, watch this again, because it's easy for me to get distracted by the linguistic stuff.
The item description can also be translated as the imperfection of the present Golden Order was the fluctuation in perspective. There was no need for gods with hearts like men, the defect in the order.
Wait, now I need to look at the original English, what it says. Wait, what item was that? Damn it.
Now, I've seen it as the
Amending Rune of Perfect Order. Let me look this up real quick. Can I? Oh, yeah, we can do this. The current imperfection of the Golden Order or instability of ideology can be blamed upon the fickleness of the gods no better than men. That is the fly in the ointment. And for their description, the imperfection or the incompleteness of the present Golden Order was the fluctuation in perspective. There is no need for gods with hearts and minds like men, the defect in the order. And let me just double check this.
Then they were shunned. The Japanese.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Japanese
Yeah,
text is
that's
even more blunt with this condemnation. The item description can also be translated as the imperfection of the present Golden Order was the fluctuation in perspective.
Is it that different? And that kind of like makes me wonder if I'm the one that's like, I'm not sure if it's that different from the actual localization. Like, I understand like there is a very slight difference here, but the instability of ideology versus fluctuation in perspective. Okay, yeah, I can see where they're coming from with that. So hold on, I'm missing the forest for the trees, so I'm just gonna back up kind of a lot more so I can get a bit more on the same page with this guy, because I'm just totally distracted by the linguistic stuff. So I want to understand the points behind it first. So going back to chat real quick. Would you turn up the volume on the video a little bit? Sure. Okay, thanks for letting me know that, because sometimes it's hard for me to be able to tell how the sound balance is for you guys, because I also want to make sure that you guys can hear me over this. So let's do this.
Perfection of the Golden Order,
and
instability of ideology,
turn it
can be
up a little bit.
Upon the fickleness of
Can
the
you guys
gods
still
no
hear
better
me
than men.
okay as
That
I'm
is the
talking
fly
right
in the
now?
ointment.
I'll shut
There
up
are
for a little
few
bit.
subtle differences lost in translation. First, there's no mention of ideology in the original Japanese text, a term that carries a lot of baggage. Instead, the kanji used is better translated as viewpoint or perspective, so transcendental ideology should be read as transcendental viewpoint. Thanks to Redditor Sanic Flanic for pointing this out. So by acting as a transcendental viewpoint, the mending rune of perfect order would effectively provide a God's eye view of the world. And you can even make the argument that the rune itself does look like a golden eye.
Okay, yeah, I can understand the hang up with that. I could see like an ideology being synonymous with viewpoint, So I understand why the translators would have gone that way. They were probably trying to get more at what's written in between the lines than giving a more literal translation, I think, for this instance specifically. I don't necessarily think it was a bad choice, but I do want to watch the rest of this video because they might change my mind about that. Alright, sounds good. Thank you guys. Have I seen Sinister Stromboli's videos about Elden Ring symbology? Yes. I'm also a pretty active member in his streams. He streams on Twitch, by the way, if you didn't know that. Troy the Catfish, welcome into the stream. Okay. So, yeah, I do like Sinister Stromboli. He's a good friend of the stream. He's also active in the Discord. Oh, yeah, and join the Discord. Plug our own channel stuff. Okay, so going back to the Goldmask ending is the best choice in Elden Ring.
And unlike Fia and Dung Eater, who gestated their mending runes, Goldmask discovered the...
Alright, so if Garrulous Goldmask, you ever watch this video, I do want to give you a little bit of constructive criticism here. So sometimes I think between your audio clips, you have this little pop-in static sound. So if you ever go into your video editor, one thing that you should consider doing is trimming the ends of your audios to get rid of these little stutters, static sounds. So I'll back up just to like point it out. And I apologize to literally everybody else who's watching this, because this, you know, like once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it.
Mending and Dung Eater, who gestated...
All right, it's about to happen, like right about now.
Their mending runes. Goldmask...
So I guess that wasn't necessarily in between like audio clips, but that's just something you can work on. And as a content creator, one thing you can do, and this is really annoying, I'm not so sure how my PC is going to handle this while I'm streaming. This is probably a bad idea. Give me a second to open this program, because it's going to take a minute. Goldmask's ending is the Golden Order, but more of an age of men rather than reliance of the gods. It's weird. To me, it sounds more like deistic. So what can we do here? Oh, I got rid of that stuff. I'm going to need to go back to the main timeline here. Oh man, I think I got rid of all the audio, at least on my hard drive for this video for the most part. I have to find something else. Same thing with this one. Uh-oh. Okay, I finally have a good working video with audio. So I use DaVinci Resolve to edit my videos. You don't necessarily have to use this, but let's go look if I have anything. Okay, this might be a good example. So I have a crossfade here. Why is this music? Hold on, let's mute this track real quick. Oh, so that was just music. Oh wait, no, but I do have something going on right there. Okay. So we'll mute the music track on audio layer 1. Even then, there can... So I have a really bad mouth click here, and let's go ahead and CSI zoom in. If you like trim things down, you can get into like a tenth of a millisecond essentially, or I guess a millisecond is like a tenth of a second, to just create a small gap. And most people aren't going to notice it. And you could also use sliders to soften the gaps as you like transition in and out. So this is what I have right now. Let me zoom back out for a second. Even then, there can... So, I mean, right there, it doesn't sound very good. And if we do it like this without it, you can hear the difference. Even then, there can...
Even then, there can...
It's not great, but it's better than nothing, and that's one thing you can do. But I originally thought your like issue was just at the beginnings and ends of your lines. Because sometimes when I finish a line, I will like click my mouse to like stop recording, and you can like pick that up. So oftentimes I need to bring things in a little bit like that. All right, so that's just kind of my constructive criticism as a fellow content creator. Hopefully that helps you. Sorry if this is a little bit too in the woods for everybody else, but maybe you guys enjoy getting a sight into how the sausage is made. Poll says Ronnie's ending would be more of an Age of Men, and Goldmask's ending, the Elden Ring remains, but with a more monotheistic spin. No more pantheon of gods that are fickle like men. That's kind of how I feel. I guess Ronnie is sort of deistic in a way as well. It's more like, I feel like Ronnie's the parent in the room, and she's like, I'm going shopping, don't misbehave, or if you do, deal with it yourselves. Whereas like Goldmask is like Big Brother, where he's gonna have like a big Elden Ring camera on anybody, or on everybody rather. But I mean, that might not be entirely fair. It's just kind of hard to reconcile what exactly is different about each order when all of them, except for like Ronnie and the Frenzied Flame endings, are literally reskins of each other. Hey Cantrell, nice to see you again. It's the first time you've seen a Japanese game take this approach or denote it. You think you like this ending because it does point out the major flaw you see in how the gods act. Yeah, but to be fair, you don't need the ending itself, just like the description of the mending rune is good enough. Alright, you lurk now and then? Well, thanks for lurking.
Discovered the mending rune of perfect order. To me, this distinction emphasizes the truly transcendental nature of what Goldmask found. It also overcomes what Goldmask identified as the fatal conceit in the current Golden Order, the fickleness of the gods. It's not hard to see why. Marika tried to destroy the Elden Ring, while Radagon attempted to repair it. And of course, Radagon is Marika. Radagon also waged war against Renala, but repented. Then he married Renala, but then left her. During the Age of the Crucible, the Omen and the Misbegotten were valued as almost holy for their horns and other aspects of the Crucible, but now they're denigrated for those very same attributes. Likewise, the Crucible Knights were valiant soldiers for Godfrey, then they were shunned. The Japanese text is even more blunt with this condemnation. The item description can also be translated as the imperfection of the present Golden Order was the fluctuation in perspective. There was no need for gods with hearts like men, the defect in the order. Now, I've seen some people criticize the Age of Order ending because they think it would take away free will from everyone. But this description should make it clear that Goldmask is criticizing the gods for being fickle and wants to prevent that. And we see how that happens during the ending cutscene. The Mending Rune of Perfect Order forms what looks like a protective barrier around the Elden Ring embodied inside Marika. So I think this Mending Rune will prevent the Elden Ring from being tampered with by gods like Marika and Radagon. And since this Mending Rune...
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, and just one of the bigger questions I think everybody has about Goldmask is like, what does that actually entail? He might not really mess with the order itself. It is possible that making the perfect mending rune could mean that he makes an Elden Ring that is no longer breakable. So maybe he forges an indestructible Elden Ring so it couldn't be shattered again, because of someone like Marika, based on their fickle whims because of the flaws in their order, perhaps. But I don't really know. That's heavy speculation on my part.
Rune is transcendental, it overcomes the limited perspective of both men and gods, which makes Goldmask's discovery all the more astounding. There's also a fascinating parallel here between Goldmask and Rykard. As the Taker's cameo explains, when Rykard turned to heresy, taking by force became the rule. The gods themselves were no different after all. In German, this text is even more biting. That roughly translates as, why not also follow the path of the gods? For Rykard, the fact that the gods could be cruel, violent, and oppressive let him justify his own cruelty, violence, and oppression. But for Goldmask, the notion that the gods themselves were no different may have caused him to start to reconsider the very fundamentals of the Golden Order. Ironically, by being so devout, Goldmask would also be seen as a heretic, first by his disciples who abandoned him, and then by Corhin. Fun fact, you don't actually need Corhin to do Goldmask's quest. And who needs disciples when you can T-pose for days? Even though it's basically a meme, there's actually a lot of symbolics with Goldmask T-posing. At first, when Goldmask is in Leyndell, he only does half of his signature move. More specifically, he's...
Yeah, these are good observations. Something that I've noticed, but I haven't bothered to like go back and map it out. So I'm interested what exactly the differences are, because I know like once you tell him about America, I think he switches to inner order. And then when he gets up to the mountaintops, he does like totality. I don't remember the actual like symbols with their like Ginyu Force poses, but anyway, good observations here.
He's doing the gesture for outer order, which you get from Melina at the Minor Erdtree Church. Melina recounts these spoken echoes of America.
I declare mine intent to search the depths of the Golden Order through understanding of the proper way. Our faith, our grace is increased. Those blissful early days of blind belief are long past.
Like America, Goldmask is also searching the depths of the Golden Order. Or as Smotown pointed out in one of his characteristically excellent videos, at this time, Goldmask is missing half of the equation. That is, he doesn't know the true identity of Radagon. What's more, you can get the other half of this T-pose, which is called Inner Order, and you get it from meeting D and Nurkron. So by combining Inner Order and Outer Order, we get Golden Order Totality. But Goldmask isn't the only one who T-poses in the game. The incantation, Litany of Proper Death, depicts an image of order, a figure that has the same T-pose you see at Radagon's churches and his statue in Leyndell. Even more telling...
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Radagon also does that pose when he uses like his version of Litany of Proper Death in his fights. And his version of Litany of Proper Death actually affects us and does a ton of damage, whereas like it's kind of useless on anything that isn't Those Who Live in Death when the Tarnished uses the spell.
Radagon's crisscross pattern appears when using this incantation, and this incantation is highly effective against Those Who Live in Death.
Actually, one thing that's kind of interesting, I guess, to consider with this version of the Litany of Proper Death and Radagon's Elden Ring is this is only half of it, technically. And it isn't super obvious that that's the case until you actually fight Radagon in his fights. And he has like maybe one or two moves where the ring is totally enclosed and the lattice structure can be found in the middle. So that's something I haven't really thought about in this perspective, like looking at this symbol specifically right now.
Incantation. And this incantation is highly effective against Those Who Live in Death. To me, the game is heavily implying that Radagon was leading the war against Those Who Live in Death. And this was a major reason why Goldmask turned against the current version of the Golden Order. As we learn from the Order Healing incantation, the noble Goldmask lamented what had become of the Hunters, how easy it is for learning and learnedness to be reduced to the ravings of fanatics. All the good and the great wanted, and their foolishness was an absolute evil to contend with. Does such a notion exist in the fundamentals of order? So the fact that Goldmask is lamenting the foolishness and fanaticism of those who persecute people strongly implies this type of discriminatory action just wouldn't exist in a world of perfect order, a world he achieves with his Mending Rune. And by rejecting the notion of absolute evil, Goldmask echoes the wise words of everyone's favorite tortoise pontiff.
Heresy is not native to the world. It is but a contrivance. All things can be conjoined.
Notably, this same logic would also apply to the other groups persecuted by America's Golden Order, like the Misbegotten and the Omen, even if Goldmask didn't directly talk about them. You know what I mean. Since the Goldmask ending is partly motivated by wanting to end the persecution of those who live in death, to me, Fear's ending feels a bit redundant. That said, the Age of the Duskborn does unequivocally confirm the fickleness of the gods. Those who
my man just said it himself. Goldmask's ending is the redundant one, right? No. But in all seriousness, I do wonder whether or not Those Who Live in Death have a place in Goldmask's ending. And I think this is just like one of the larger issues with the endings in general. They're not differentiated enough to allow the player to understand the consequences of their actions, other than they just kind of completed their goal, I guess, which is a bit disappointing, but honestly, it's just kind of a par for the course with a lot of the FromSoft endings, where you're just like, what? I mean, even to this day, I'm still not entirely sure what's up with the Usurper ending in Dark Souls 3. So, what else did Garrulous Goldmask say that I wanted to talk about? Let me back up real quick. It would be nice if Fia and Dungeater's Goldmask's ending would be nice for Fia and Dungeater's goals. Fia's is now better. Dungeater is horrid. You're still Team Fia? Okay.
All things can be conjoined.
Right. So, those who live in death still exist in the current incarnation of the Golden Order. So, Garrulous Goldmask here, the content creator, is suggesting that those who live in death should still exist in Goldmask's ending, which I guess that kind of makes sense. I don't think I considered it from that angle, but I don't know if that's necessarily a good ending, because those who live in death are suffering. So unless Goldmask's ending can alleviate their suffering, I'm not entirely sure. Like, hold on, let me rephrase that. Can alleviate their suffering by ending their attachment to life. I'm not entirely sure that's actually good for them. Whereas, I mean, Fia's is also questionable, but she just kind of wants to stop the persecution of those who live in death. So I think hers is kind of just as bad. And Dungeater just kind of embraces the poop. Metaphorically and physically. Or literally, rather. And physically. Chadwick Dillon, nice to see you again. You're not sure you agree with that part, if that's the suggestion? It sounds like live and let live, which never works in reality. I mean, that's kind of like one of the harder things to parse. Like, the Elden Ring has metaphysical laws that govern the universe, and we're just not entirely sure how Goldmask's ending is different than Fia's, and maybe they're not actually different, and we just don't know.
Notably, this same logic would also apply to the other groups persecuted by America's Golden Order, like the Misbegotten and the Omen, even if Goldmask didn't directly talk about them. You know what I mean. Since the Goldmask ending is partly motivated by wanting to end the persecution of those who live in death, to me, Fia's ending feels a bit redundant. That said, the Age of the Duskborn does unequivocally confirm the fickleness of the gods. Those who live in death were persecuted for defiling the Golden Order, but now they are the Golden Order. The same also applies for Dungeater and his Blessing of Despair ending. Another criticism of the Goldmask ending, as well as the other three endings that repair the Elden Ring.
Okay, that's interesting. So you know how I was just talking about how Litany of Proper Death is only one half of the thing? The Elden Beast has the inverted half, like the opposite half. So when you do, when you, the player, or Radagon does like Litany of Proper Death, the arc is facing the player. Hold on, let's use MS Paint. So let's say this is an aerial bird's eye view, and this is your Tarnished or Radagon. Anyway, I don't know, I'm putting in so much effort into this. Radagon, right? When he does it, it goes like that. And then you get crisscross, latticed applesauce. But this guy...
is that it still allows the greater will to be in control. There's a lot of assumptions we have about the criticism of the Goldmask also applies to Dungeater and his Blessing of Despair ending. Another criticism...
The Elden Beast is backwards in comparison. So I guess like the Elden Beast is the other half of Radagon? Which, I mean, kind of makes sense the way that he like grabs him and whatnot. Can't see my cursor. What the... Oh, okay. It's just all backwards. Anyway, putting that away. MS Paint's the secret sauce of all lore hunter videos, for sure. Okimin says, it might be a weird thing to get hung up on, but you felt like it was hard for you to get too invested in the endings and their consequences when like 99% of the people are mindless walking corpses. Yeah, I can feel that, and one of the issues is we don't know if the reason that people are mindless walking corpses is because the Elden Ring has been shattered, or whether or not it's just the natural consequence of being given everlasting life and grace. So, based on the previous From games, I would assume the latter, but it could still be like the former.
Criticism of the Goldmask ending, as well as the other 3 endings that repair the Elden Ring, is that it still allows the Greater Will to be in control. There's a lot of assumptions we have about the Greater Will that aren't actually justified in the text. A lot of the criticisms I've seen levied against the Greater Will would be more accurately directed against those who claim to be carrying out its will, like the Two Fingers or America and her Golden Order. There's also a lot of deliberate conflation between Order with a capital O as a metaphysical concept, with the Golden Order as a political empire, and America, quite literally, is the embodiment of both. It's kind of like the bumper sticker, I don't have a problem with God, it's the fan club that scares me. After delving deeper into the lore, it's really surprising just how little we know with 100% certainty about the Greater Will. We do know that the Elden Beast was the vassal of the Greater Will, while the Mirror Helm wards off the intervention of the Greater Will and its vassal fingers. And according to the Nox armor sets, we learned that long ago, the Nox invoked the ire of the Greater Will and were banished deep underground. But this banishment must have ended at some point, since descendants of the Eternal were still able to create Celia. The Greater Will does appear in quite...
So this is something that got brought up in the Discord a couple months back, and I made a short video about it, where the banishment of the Nox, surprisingly enough, isn't actually like a banishment. It's that they were destroyed underground. Well, it's a little bit unclear if they were already underground when they were destroyed or whatnot. Actually, I could just show the short now, because it's only like 40 seconds or something like that, if I have it. Malekith set Nox banishment. Elden Ring Japanese to English comparisons. The Nox weren't exactly banished underground. The Japanese for the Nox armor sets just say the Nox were destroyed underground, and it's ambiguous as to whether they were already underground when they were destroyed, or if they were destroyed first and then sent underground. Maybe this is why we can still trade. So yeah, I have the Japanese down there at the bottom, although it's covered up by this UI stuff. So my more literal translation of that would be, long ago the Nox felt the ire of the Greater Will and were defeated deep underground. They raised a false night sky and are eternally waiting for like the Lord of Night or whatever. I just didn't include it because it wasn't that relevant. So going back to what he said, let's just back up slightly.
Since descendants of the Eternal were still able to create Celia, the Greater Will does appear in quite a few item descriptions or conversations. A lot of those mentions are either hearsay or they're from the Finger Readers. The Finger Readers interpret the Two Fingers, who in turn say they are the envoys of the Greater Will. In other words, we're learning about the Greater Will from third-hand sources.
I would agree with that, although I would say like second-hand sources, but I think just calling like them second or third-hand sources is just kind of really funny play on words because they're fingers. Yeah.
So even if everyone is acting in good faith, something is bound to be lost in translation. Since it takes so long to communicate with the Greater Will, if they are even doing that, the Two Fingers have very little oversight and can do pretty much whatever they want. And we...
Oh, maybe he brings it up. No, it doesn't look like it. So I think it's one of Gideon Ofnir's items that say like the Two Fingers were like truly broken and they couldn't fulfill their purpose. Something along those lines. I'm kind of butchering it, but there is like something a little bit more explicit about that.
We do know that the Fingers have their own assassins in the forms of the Confessors, they run their own churches, and they also selected Rani, Mikola, and Melania as Empyreans to potentially replace America. Corin even considers the Two Fingers prayer book
is a work of heresy. Its incantations bear no lineage from the Erd Tree.
I would also like to point out that no...
All right, I've been kind of keeping it to myself, but Garrulous Goldmask could use a little bit of work with like the audio transitions in terms of like balancing the audio and also like using fade ins and fade outs to kind of make them feel a bit more natural, and so they don't just kind of like happen all at once. So that's something that I've tried to like be very aware of in creating my videos, and I think it just kind of helps keep people a bit more immersed when they aren't as jumpy. Although there are definitely times where you want to have things a bit more choppy to be a bit more impactful. I don't think this is one of them, so that's just a little bit of constructive criticism on my end, and I'll back up to just not talk over his points.
Also selected Rani, Mikola, and Melania as Empyreans to potentially replace America. Corin even considers the Two Fingers prayer book
Is a work of heresy. Its incantations bear no lineage from the Erd Tree.
I would also like to point out that no matter the ending, you have to choose some type of higher power to rule over the lands between. For the Age of Stars, Rani essentially becomes a god, since she is an Empyrean after all. And even the Frenzied Flame ending, which might seem to be the most rebellious, since you're, letting chaos take the world, it's still doing the bidding of an outer god. In addition to the merits of each individual ending, you also have to decide which is the least worst option between the Greater Will, Rani, and the outer god of the Frenzied Flame. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, what about Rani's ending? Isn't that a really good ending? And that's a great question, though that's a story for another time. And that time is now. Thank you so much for watching. I'm really interested to see what Yins think. So, do you agree that the Goldmask ending is the best ending? Or if you think there's something I'm missing? Let me know in the comments below.
That was a pretty quick transition out. So yeah, just like another like YouTube tip, if you leave like 10 seconds at the end of your video, you can add in the silly little, hey, subscribe to me button. And, oh wait, you did have end cards. Yeah, you already did. It's just nice to have a little bit of the extra time at the end. But either way, no, that works. I take back what I said. Yeah, so it's a pretty good video. I don't think I'm fully on board with it, but I don't necessarily think that's Garrulous Goldmask's fault as much as it is the other endings' faults. Like, is Goldmask's actually better than the others? Like, quantifiably better? I mean, he just said that Fia's ending was redundant, so it seems like there really isn't much of a difference between hers and Goldmask's. So then why is Goldmask's automatically better? I don't know. At least, like, with Fia, she brings birth back into the world in a kind of weird way. Well, maybe with, like, the deathbed companions, although you might be able to argue that they still exist in the Goldmask ending. It's just too vague for me to be fully on board with it. I do think there is a good argument that the Rani ending is the best if you consider, like, the way our reality works is being good, where it's like, you're left to your own devices while you're still alive, and then that's pretty much it. And then the afterlife stuff will be dealt with later, I guess. I don't know. Ronnie kind of place a lot of trust on the individual, whereas a Goldmask is kind of similar, maybe? I don't know. It's just kind of hard to like make an argument whether or not like order is good if there doesn't really feel like there's supposed to be a tangible difference of whether or not the order is around or whether it's not around. So I guess you might be able to make the argument that Goldmask's ending would be the best, because if it's no longer able to be meddled with at all, then you don't have to worry about whatever comes after Ronnie. So I think that's a pretty fair proposition, or position to take, rather. But I don't know. What do you guys think about it in chat? And let me go back to what you guys are saying and read some of your comments. All right, I did like it. Pokemon, welcome in. You will never understand the empathy NPCs have for those who live in death, when their only hobby seems to be attacking anything that moves. All right. Sorry, I had to look at something else. Ronnie's the good ending for the player. Goldmask is the good ending for the world. That's a good way of looking at it, maybe. Jack Roach or Roche, welcome into the stream. Nice to have you. The frenzied flame ending just seems based. Rat may have been watching a couple of my April Fool's videos a bit too often. I say couple like I have multiple ones. It's really just the one. Astynax would say Goldmask rolls up several issues and solves them. Capricious gods, persecution of the innocent, and making the Elden Ring being protected from alteration. I mean, does he though? So let's go back to that whole idea of those who live in death no longer being persecuted. Why are they being persecuted? It's because like the Golden Order zealots believe that they're anathema to the Golden Order. So, okay. Setting that aside, Goldmask says, hey, these things aren't anathema to the Golden Order. Does that mean there's still no longer going to be zealotry or discrimination based off of arbitrary things? If so, I think that would mean Goldmask would fundamentally alter people to no longer be truly free, which goes back into what he brought up towards the beginning of the video where like the Goldmask ending takes away free will. And I don't remember what he said to refute it. I might go back here, but I don't remember exactly where it was.
Even make the argument that the rune itself does look like a golden eye. Discovered the mending rune of perfect order. Translated as fickleness of the gods. Ending. Let's start with the men be much better off under the Age of Order. That said, there are quite a few mistranslations and misconceptions for the Goldmask ending,
I'm going to speed it up
which
real
could
quick.
explain why it hasn't gotten as much buzz as the others. So to figure out what happens in the Goldmask ending, let's start with the Mending Rune of Perfect Order. The Mending Rune is a rune of transcendental.
Let's go back
Thanks
to
for
the
stopping by. Today I'll explain why the Goldmask ending is the best ending in Elden Ring. So even though the Tarnished doesn't get to go on a honeymoon with a puppet, the rest of the lands between would be much better off under the Age of Order. That said, there are quite a few mistranslations and misconceptions. That is the fly in the ideology should be read as transcendental viewpoint. Thanks to Redditor Sanic Flanic for pointing this out. So by acting as a transcendental viewpoint, the Mending Rune of Perfect Order would effectively provide a god's eye view of the world. And you can even make the argument that the rune itself does look like a golden eye. And unlike Fia and Dung Eater, who gestated their mending runes, Goldmask discovered the mending rune of perfect order. To me, this distinction emphasizes the truly transcendental nature of what Goldmask found. It also
I feel like that's, I mean, he's just gestating it in a different way.
comes what Goldmask identified as the failed
Like he still dies like the other two.
fickleness of the gods. It's not hard to see why. America tried to destroy the Elden Ring, while the Omen and the Misbegotten soldiers with God of the present Golden Order was the fluctuation in perspective. There was no need for gods with everyone. But this description should make it clear that Goldmask is criticizing the gods for being fickle and the Elden Ring embodied inside America. So I think this mending rune will prevent the Elden Ring from being tampered with by gods like America and Vargram. And since this mending rune is transcendental, it overcomes the limited perspective of both men and gods, which makes Goldmask's discovery all the more astounding.
So, I mean, one question that brings up is, like, what is really the difference between a man and a god? Or, like, Ronnie? Because, like, they became demigods after America accepted them into her family. So I guess, like, there's no Goldmask family. So whoever controls the Elden Ring should be the god, I guess, which would be us, the Elden Lord. I don't know. I'm just not entirely sure that this really works out the way he's arguing.
There's also a fascinating parallel here between Goldmask and White Lord. As the Taker's cameo explains, when White Lord and oppress the very fundamentals of the Golden Order. Fun fact, you don't actually need Corden to do Gold. There's actually a lot of Witchery Church. Melano recounts
I think he said it over here.
Our faith, our grace is increased.
the excellent video. At this time, Goldmask is missing half of the equation. That is, he doesn't. But Goldmask isn't the only one who T-poses in the game. More telling, Radagon's crisscross pattern appears when using the noble Goldmask lamented what had become of the hunters. How easy it is for learning wouldn't exist in a world of perfect order. Applied to the other groups persecuted by Merca's with his mending moon. And by rejecting the notion of absolute evil, Goldmask echoes how easy it is for learning and learnedness to be reduced to the ravings of fanatics. All the good and the great wanted, and their foolishness was an absolute evil to contend with. Does such a notion exist in the fundamentals of order? So the fact that Goldmask is lamenting the foolishness and fanaticism of those who persecute people strongly implies this type of discriminatory action just wouldn't exist in a world of perfect order.
So, yeah, I think I want to double check what he says after this. I feel like if discrimination doesn't exist in the world of like the perfect mending rune, that would mean that he would fundamentally alter the traits of individuals to no longer be discriminatory, because there's a difference between like institutionalized discrimination, which is like what the Golden Order is practicing against those who live in death, and individual based, which is kind of like D taking it a bit too far. And I think he's just using the Golden Order as a bit of a pretext. And just like the way, like, I don't think it's going to get rid of conflict in general. It just might get rid of like the ideas of good and evil. But I mean, some would argue that means like it would discard part of people's like true identities, and would therefore make the argument that it should not be considered the best ending because it's altering people directly and they're no longer themselves. Whereas Ronnie's ending would keep people true to themselves, if that makes sense. So yeah, sorry for just kind of like taking so much time to go through that real quick. Let me go back to what you guys are saying here in the chat. You love those who live in death. You think the skeletons should vote? Maybe they do deserve a vote. A boat too, why not? Well, I guess they have a boat with the Tibia Mariner. You always thought people were being funny with Ronnie's ending, like just being thirsty, the waifu people. Yeah, it's a little, yeah, some of them are kind of bad. It's kind of hard to really know some people's motivations, whether they're memeing or whether or not they're serious and do believe Ronnie's ending is the best. Hey Teen Sith, nice to see you again. We just finished the Garrulous Goldmask video about the Goldmask ending being the best choice in Elden Ring, and I am vehemently disagreeing. Maybe not vehemently, but giving my civil disagreements? I can't think of the word. Anyway. Vacuous says, you think he still sees them as a problem, but wants a more logical solution with dealing with them. Maybe. And I'm saying, like, I'm just kind of taking this idea to its most logical extreme. This might not actually be the case, but if so, if this is not the case, I don't think Goldmask's ending actually solves it the way that Garrulous Goldmask might be asserting, but I do want to double check what he says like right after this. Kenchel says, you don't get what no good and evil not existing is. That's relativity. That leads to chaos. So, good and evil don't necessarily exist according to like Goldmask and the Perfect Mending Rune. It's just kind of people's perspectives where they're like pitted against each other. So by saying that you're good, that must mean you must stand against evil. So therefore, no matter what you stand against, that thing is evil by virtue of not being on the same side as you, you know? So that kind of like leads to heady fanaticism. Aldegusto says, saying things are no longer anathema doesn't mean that there is no discrimination. It just means he has a place for everything. And you might be right about that, but my point is, even if there's a place for everything, that doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't going to be conflict about stuff in general. Like, there's still, like, wanton violence. Wanton? It's kind of hard. How do I pronounce that word? That doesn't sound like an appetizer. Anyway. Clown Scum likes Ronnie's ending for both reasons. People get freedom and you get a cute moon waifu. Win-win situation. Teen Sis says, really do not think Goldmask's ending is good either, lol. Wanton? Oh, duh. Thank you. I'm having a moment.
World he achieves with his mending moon. And by rejecting the notion of absolute evil, Goldmask echoes the wise words of everyone's favorite tortoise pontiff.
Heresy is not native to the world. It is but a contrivance. All things can be conjoined.
Notably, this same logic would also apply to the other groups persecuted by...
That's a little bit of a non sequitur. Like, heresy is different from evil, but I digress. Like, that's kind of splitting hairs, but I don't think that follows with what he just said there.
America's Golden Order, like the Misbegotten and the Omen, even if Goldmask didn't directly talk about them. You know what I mean. Since the Goldmask ending is partly motivated by wanting to end the persecution of those who live in death, to me, Fear's ending feels a bit redundant. That said, the Age of the Devil is the other three endings that repair the Elder Order with a capital O as a metaphor. It's really surprising just how little we know with 100% certainty.
And then he talks about like how we can't really trust the fingers, which I agree with that stuff there, and we don't really know what's going on with the Greater Will. So yeah, I think this is a good video. It does have some cool observations, which I appreciate. I don't necessarily agree that it's the best ending. I also don't necessarily disagree, but that's because of like the nebulous nature of the endings in Elden Ring in general. So regardless, it's given us good discussion and good food for thought, so I appreciate it. It's spitting heresy. Thanks. All right, so that was Garrulous Goldmask's. The Gold-ass ending is the best choice in Elden Ring. So what do we have next? All right, let's just go on forward this way. Elden Ring lore, the Claymen, Relics of the Ancient Dynasty by Square Table Gaming. So this was suggested to me. I have not heard of Square Table Gaming, and I'm not familiar with their channel. So I'm interested to see what this is about. And I wasn't given a direct suggestion of what video to look at. So I just went to the channel, and I was like, okay, I like the Claymen. I think I have a pretty decent idea of what they are, but I'm curious as to what others' opinions are. So let's go ahead and dive on into this. Do you think I'm saying gold-ass ending? Gold-ass ending? I'm probably just speaking quickly. And like I said earlier, like when I do speak normally, I tend to not enunciate very well. So now that I'm speaking more slowly, hopefully you'll hear me say gold mask more straightforwardly, I guess. Anyway, let's go to the Square Table Gaming's Claymen and Relics of Ancient Dynasty video.
It would be wrong to say that life thrives in the lands between. It once did, during a time of abundance we as players will never get to experience. It would be more accurate to say that within the lands between, life persists. There are so many we see in passing throughout our journey who are emaciated, shambling sacks of flesh and bone that should have died long ago, but cannot find rest due to the removal of the rune of death. Even those who are defeated, cut down in battle, don't truly die, but are recycled through the Erd Tree to live again in a never-ending cycle, which is only broken by the imperfections of the primordial crucible, slipping its way into a rebirth and creating an omen. Even those given the respect of an Erd Tree burial are not truly laid to rest, as their ashes can be summoned back to life to serve a master, perpetuating this concept of undeath and servitude to whoever holds the essence of life within their hands. It's important to contextualize this land of undeath before diving into today's topic, because there is little to no information defining their history, but they serve as another example of the twisting of life and death by those who inhabit the lands between. Today, we are discussing the Claymen. These unassuming underground denizens may be tied to the oldest history of the land, a history that has been lost, making them among the most mysterious enemies we faced. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Elden Lore.
I think that's a very solid intro. I really liked the line about how... What was... I forgot it already. Not even 2 minutes into the video. About life not necessarily existing in the lands between, but just persisting. I think that's a very good tagline there. You guys are saying you could read the script really well. You guys are making me feel insecure. No, but it's all good. Boris, welcome back to the stream. Any hot takes so far? Yeah, we just watched a video about Goldmask, so we just kind of argued to the wee hours of the higher plane and the cosmos, of course. So, all right, going back to Square Table Gaming.
Whether this is your first time finding the channel or you've been watching from the beginning, we hope you enjoy this lore dive. When I started the series, I never expected it would gain this kind of traction, and that's entirely due to the Elden Ring lore community that took us in and decided our explorations were worth their time. If you feel the same way, please consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss any of our videos in this series. Even if you don't, we're just happy you decided to check us out. Make sure you hit up the Elden Lore playlist, because with over 70 episodes, we're sure you'll be able to find a topic you find interesting. If not, let us know what you'd like us to explore in the comments. Now let's get back to the topic at hand. The Claymen are only found underground in the Siofra and Ainsel rivers. There are a few different variants we can encounter, some carrying spears, others with daggers, and still more that cast magic without a catalyst.
Alright, Disillusioned Dork, thank you for the £10. Have I seen Charred Thermos's Bloodborne dissection series? He proposes that the game is a giant allegory for the grim history of 19th century medical science and surgery and anesthesia. He mentions me. So I've definitely heard of it. I have not watched it yet. It has been requested that I watch it, and so I do have it queued up into the playlist at some point. The funny thing is, Chard Thermos also commented on one of my posts where he asked me, instead of watching like the first episode, to look at his video on Lawrence first. So I will oblige him and look at that video and then maybe his first video after that. But once again, thank you for the tenor and welcome into the stream. Nice to have you. So going back to this.
South of the Old Palace ruins, we can find the ashes of 2 Claymen, which gives us the best in-game explanation of who these people were. Ashen remains in which spirits yet dwell, used to summon the spirits of 2 Claymen. Bowed with age, these spirits are sluggish but hard to stagger. The warped remains of priests who searched for revelation in service of the ancient dynasty. They employ 2 sorceries that produce smaller and larger bubbles. This description gives us
I don't remember if there was a difference in the 1.0 version of the text. I might compare it off screen while he continues on. I might miss a couple things. But yeah, the Claymen are one of the most intriguing enemies to me. So I'm curious what else they have to say. So I think the video is off to a good start. It has really good pacing. They said they already have like over 70 videos by the time this one was produced, which was, only 2 weeks ago. Okay. So yeah, they've really been churning out the content. Curious to see what else they have. But so far, I think they're doing a really good job.
It's a lot to explore, so we'll start with the fact that they are warped remains. The Claymen are not truly living beings. They were once priests, but now they're nothing but animated clay, brought to life through some form of magic we cannot know, as it belonged to their ancient dynasty. We can see after defeating a Clayman that their bodies do not simply fall to the ground. They become a puddle of clay, their form completely undone by our attacks. So these creatures are the reanimated remains of priests, but what's more interesting is their use of bubble sorcery. We can even find these sorceries for ourselves. The Oracle Bubbles and Great Oracular Bubble share the same descriptions. Sorcery of the Claymen who served as priests in the ancient dynasty produces a magical bubble that drifts towards foes before they naturally pop. Charging increases the delay before the bubbles pop. The Claymen search for lost oracles within their bubbles. First, we want to clarify our interpretation of their search for oracles. Oracles were people who could see the future or sought prophecy, but we believe the word oracles is being used differently here. A more archaic definition of this word is a response or message given by an oracle, typically one that is ambiguous or obscure. This would mean that the Claymen themselves were once oracles searching for prophecy or simply the future. Second, the concept of oracles and their relation to bubbles seems familiar. The oracle envoys utilize horns whose ashes of war produce golden bubbles from the instruments themselves. The envoys, who herald the coming of a new age, prophesying it, also utilize bubble magic. Perhaps before the Claymen were made into the abominations they now are, there...
Alright, so just to go off of what they were saying here. Okay, I wasn't muted. With the whole idea of the Claymen using oracles, or like using the bubbles as oracles. So I don't think the Japanese really aligns with that. This isn't going to be super clear. I could use Deep L. That'd probably be fastest for you guys. Let's pull up the text here. I guess I'll just use the last 2 lines. So this is a machine translating program. So take a lot of this stuff with a grain of salt, although sometimes this is better than Google Translate generally. It still does have issues, but sometimes just to go over things quickly, I think this can be a good resource. So The mud people are searching for the lost oracle within the Shabos. So this is kind of my point. Like the Shabon means bubble. So within the bubbles, they're looking for lost oracles. So it's not like... Actually, I'm not... Maybe he is right. Maybe it could be read that way. They're looking for lost oracles. It's a noun versus a verb, though. Isn't it? I'm going to have to think about that more linguistically. So he might be okay there, but my first instinct looking at the Japanese is like, they're looking for oracles. Let me do this. Look at the native dictionary. Because, I mean, I'm not too familiar with oracles in English or Japanese, apparently. Oh, yeah, you can maybe. All right, anyway, let's go back to the video real quick. Sorry about that. And let me check what you guys are saying in chat real quick. You thought Oracle in the Japanese was about the prophecy itself, or are you misremembering? Oracle in English can be talking about a person, the act of giving Oracle, and the oracular message itself. Yeah, I'm going to have to think about that in terms of like... So like the English, it would seem like a verb to like Oracle or divine something, but maybe the Japanese doesn't work that way, so I'll look into that a bit more.
Their roles as priests were much like that of the Oracle envoys. They may have served the purpose of deciphering the future of their ancient dynasty, looking for their new leaders, or determining the best course of action based on the future they could see. This could explain why there are so many Claymen, so many priests. If an oracle was found that laid out the end of their civilization, perhaps the people of their dynasty were conscripted, made priests, and forced to study the bubbles, desperately looking for a way to preserve their way of life. Of course, if all that remains of them are the Claymen, clearly they did not succeed. When it comes to the ancient dynasty that the Claymen were a part of, there is no clear answer. We find the ruins of the Ul Palace deep below the ground, where most of these enemies gather, and much of the architecture within can be found above ground as well. Tarnished Archaeologist has an amazing video on what this dynasty could have been, so take a minute to open that link above, and keep it in your back pocket for once this video is over. The most apparent piece of architecture...
Yeah, and Teen Sith says they take it as they're searching for lost messages or prophecies within the bubbles. So yeah, that's a good thing to bring back into the conversation. And so I was like getting lost in the linguistic weeds again, but no, I agree with that completely, that like it doesn't really matter if they're like looking for like literal oracles. I do think they are like looking for messages. So yeah, like in the broader context of what he's saying, I would agree that they're looking for messages within the bubbles that they cast. And I don't know if he's going to go through it in the video. Maybe not, because there's not a lot of time left. But one thing that I've mentioned, I think in my gold and silver video, if not definitely in the Discord, is that... Let me look it up. So within the oracle bubbles... we have what I would say is like an access point to the cosmos, kind of like the way that water serves as a barrier between dimensions in Bloodborne, between like the waking world and the cosmos. When they poof these out in our super slow-mo, you can see, you know, this is arguable that, hey, this doesn't really look like stars, but maybe it's supposed to represent stars. So with stars' connection to night and being able to guide fate, I think they might have been trying to read these bubbles as a way to like read the stars and understand fate through them. But that's just kind of my headcanon. It's not technically confirmed, but I mean, I think this is a really good headcanon, and I would stand by it much more than some other theories that I've had. Looks like a galaxy. Yeah. Let's see. Oops. Sorry for your ears. I forgot that it hits me.
Texture.
Oh yeah, Disillusioned Dork. Welcome into the stream. You asked, are the bubble spells even viable or meta in the game? They can be. Teensith has a video where like somebody kills Margit in New Game +7 before he even lands with some bubble stacking, which is kind of funny. So let's back up a little bit here.
Pocket for once this video is over. The most apparent piece of architecture we can link between the Ul Palace ruins and the land above is the statue of a bearded man with long skinny arms holding a stone tablet. This statue can also be found throughout the Mohgwyn Dynasty, showing us how Mohg is building his legacy on the bones of those who came before. If we look at the long limbs of the Claymen, we can reasonably assume they were once of the same race as this revered figure, though who they were is a mystery that may be lost to the ages. There is one weapon that can drop from the Claymen that we believe hints at what ended their ancient dynasty. The Clayman's harpoon is a harpoon with a tip made of a sharpened meteorite shard, wielded by the Claymen who infest dynastic remains. The blade emits a faint light and deals magic damage. The first place your mind may want to go when hearing that they wield a meteorite shard would be that of Estelle and the gravity magics of the Alabaster Lords. After all, they are described as stone-skinned, not unlike clay, and they came from the meteors which fell into the lands between, carrying Estelle and others like her. However, the magic seen on the tips of these harpoons is not purple, it's white. If these meteorites carry magic, and they're not the same kind of magic we've seen carried by meteorites in the past, then the ancient dynasty likely predates even the arrival of Estelle and the gravity.
I'm not sure I entirely follow this line of thought. I think they're trying to argue that like all meteorite stuff is supposed to be purple, but I think the Carian blue, and I might be misremembering, uses blue glintstone and is said to be meteoric. Actually, I should look up just meteor in general. Gravity stone fan for sure is purple. Meteorites of Estelle, blah blah blah. The Olivinus glintstone crown began with Lusat, and its adherents continue his study of meteors. So let's look at the Olivinus crown real quick. Let me pull up the icons. I don't know if I have it labeled. Let me... Right, no, I'll just do like a Google image search. Let's do this way. So yeah, this one has a green rock at the top of it. So I don't think it's fair to say that like all meteors are purple, although I might be putting words into their mouth right now. So let's go back real quick and let me back up just to like make sure that I heard what I thought I heard.
Not unlike clay, and they came from the meteors which fell on dynastic remains. The blade emits a faint light and deals magic damage. The first place your mind may want to go when hearing that they wield a meteorite shard would be that of Estelle and the gravity magics of the Alabaster Lords. After all, they are described as stone-skinned, not unlike clay, and they came from the meteors which fell into the lands between, carrying Estelle and others like her.
Alright, so it's the Alabaster's Lord Sword, which is forged from a blue-white meteoric ore. So not all meteors are purple, although he did say that you might first think about this, so he might elaborate a bit further.
However, the magic seen on the tips of these harpoons is not purple, it's white. If these meteorites carry magic, and they're not the same kind of magic we've seen carried by meteorites in the past, then the ancient dynasty likely predates even the arrival of Estelle and the gravity magics of the stars. Perhaps this...
Yeah, I'm not sure that conclusion follows from the argument, just because the tips of the harpoons aren't purple is kind of what I'm getting away from that. Um, so yeah, I would kind of disagree with this point right here, though.
This race and their dynasty was wiped out long ago by a different meteorite, one now buried so deeply underground that the only remains of it exist in the spears of these undead priests. Of course, this lighter color is also reminiscent of certain kinds of glintstone, but not closely enough that we'd feel comfortable drawing any theories here.
I mean, aren't there other like glintstone shards underground? Maybe not as deep in Shifra. Actually, let me think about that. Yeah, because no, even deeper, because there's like a bunch of like the purple glintstone around the Uul ruins in the Lake of Rot. Of course, it's easier for me to just like say that, but let's go ahead and show you guys. Oops. Not sure if I have footage just looking at... Oh, no, I definitely do. Okay. So yeah, this is obviously in the Lake of Rot. We have like this purple looking glintstone. So this stuff does extend very deep underground. So maybe I'm just kind of misunderstanding or misrepresenting his point. But based on what I've seen so far. Anyway.
Even with the lines we've drawn, the Claymen are still shrouded in mystery. What was their ancient dynasty? Who or what did they worship? Is their use of clay to create a form of undeath representative of their connection to the land? These are all questions with no concrete answers. We wish there were more to say here, as this is only a glimpse into the forgotten history of the lands between. Before the demigods, before the Golden Order, maybe even before the dragons, this ancient dynasty thrived enough that they created their own cycle of death and rebirth, and even learned to use the power of sorcery and bubbles to discern the future. We believe they knew their end was coming, so perhaps the traces of them we can find above ground indicate a different fate. Maybe they aren't gone from the world, and have simply found a way to integrate themselves into the lands between as we know it now.
So going back to like where they came from and stuff, one theory that I have, and this is complete speculation on my part, is the Claymen might be animated remains of like the dead, potentially due to like the weird like looking bubble things on their back. I feel like even though they're made out of mud, it might have been that the Claymen are not that different from the way, like, I don't know if I actually have a label for these. Ooze might work. Like they might be analogous to like the giant beast blood oozes that you can see throughout the lands between. Like these are just amalgamations of bones and blood, animal bones and blood more specifically. So maybe like the bubbles on the Clayman's back, and I'll try to show those as well if I can. Will this one work? I don't know if I have an ooze close-up. Alright. I think this will work well enough. Like, I think that these bubbles might be analogous to glintstone, or like a very primal form of glintstone, and it might contain like the equivalent of souls, and they might just start animating a body. Because we do know, like with Selin and Ronnie especially, souls can animate inanimate things with dolls. So maybe Clay isn't that different. But again, that is a very big headcanon theory there. So let's go back forward a little bit to what they were saying. And also, welcome some people back into the chat. We had Spoonbender, welcome back to the chat. Nice to see you again. And Ponyboy. Have we watched the color theory video by Hawkshaw yet? Not yet. I do think I have that one specifically queued up on the channel. So that is something I intend to get to at some point. Ava has entered the chat. Chadwick Dillon said, they seem like Talmudic golems to them, by the way. Yeah, hopefully I said Talmud properly, but obviously they do kind of resemble golems. Pole says, aren't those glintstone crystals coming from below Ray Lucaria? It's been a long time since you've played, but wasn't the Lake of Rot below Ray Lucaria? Yes. So one idea that I've had is, I've wondered whether or not Ray Lucaria is built on a gigantic stump of a tree, because glintstone is said to be amber, and amber is supposed to literally come from the sap of a tree. So if we take that super literally, does that mean like all glintstone comes from like tree sap, tree amber? Maybe. I do think obviously there's a good reason to assume that it's used a bit more metaphorically within the context of Elden Ring. And even if it's not metaphorically used, we still have like all the stuff to consider with it being a fantastical setting with magic to contend with. So you might have other explanations to work with glintstone potentially coming from amber, I guess. So I do have some footage of the Ray Lucarian glintstone mine area. So let me pull this up. Disillusioned Dork, thank you for the extra 5. A bit of a tangent, but how come Radahn doesn't use carrion magic despite being Renala's son? Only just occurred to you. Could you elaborate on what you mean by like carrion magic? Like magic of the death? Or magic of death? So Rykard does use death magic. I guess we don't really see Ranni using it unless you count like the insta-kill she uses as death magic. But I think by the time we do see Radahn, his wits have been degraded to the point where he could only do the most natural, like the stuff that's just most ingrained into him, which might be like his meteoric magic. Oh, Carian. Okay. Maybe that's a bit of autocorrect stuff going on. That would make sense. All right. Yeah, that makes sense. We don't really see him using Carian magic, despite being Renala's son. So he was taught by an Alabaster Lord to do meteoric stuff, whereas I guess like Renala may have encountered the primeval current of her own making with her moon, so she might not have felt the need to use as much meteoric type magic, but she still uses Comet Azure, so there is like a weird overlap between her abilities, because she's allegedly exiled Lusat and Azure for their primeval current stuff, but she still uses primeval current sorcery, which seems a little bit hypocritical, but it might be more related to the Graven School masses. Radahn is only said to have learned gravity sorceries magic-wise, otherwise normal sword and board. Yeah. And a lot of the, like, if you consider the Carian Cuckoo Knights and, like, Loretta and stuff, they seem to use, like, a more Spellblade type attacks. And we also do have, like, a decent amount of, like, the Spellblade twin mask users in Ray Lucaria itself. So Radahn might have just been, like, emblematic of that kind of principle. He seems like a Spellblade, but with maybe a little bit more ranged options. So yeah, let's go back to the Ray Lucaria thing with comparing it to the Lake of Rot. I'm not seeing it in my footage. Oh, okay, here we go. So as you go up and down the elevator here, you can see a bunch of like purple glintstones coming out of the side walls of Ray Lucaria. And this is some B-roll, obviously, to just like show this off. And so like this big column goes directly down into the Lake of Rot, which is the thing that we just looked at a moment ago. So if you look at it on the map, they just kind of perfectly line up. And it's taking a while for my stuff to index. Here we go. So yeah, that's just kind of where it all comes down to. So this is all connected, and above here is Raya Lucaria. So good questions. Thanks for bringing those up. It's kind of sad that both Ronnie and Radon may have had some kind of mentor character, but not Rykard. Maybe that's why you turned to the snake. The snake was the mentor. You forgot how Karian is spelled? It's okay. It gave me a good laugh. I appreciate it.
Worship. Is their use of clay to create a form of undeath representative of their connection to the land? These are all questions with no concrete answers. We wish there were more to say here, as this is only a glimpse into the forgotten history of the lands between. Before the demigods, before the Golden Order, maybe even before the dragons, this ancient dynasty thrived enough that they created their own cycle of death and rebirth, and even learned to use the power of sorcery and bubbles to discern the future. We believe they knew their end was coming.
So yeah, there's, just to reiterate, like, my idea of the Claymen kind of being animated by, like, the bubbles on their back is just headcanon. We don't know that for sure, so he is correct here for pointing out, like, we don't really know what the deal is with them. I do think he's probably right on the money with the idea that the Claymen may have predated a lot of the other civilizations, and I don't know if they would, like, predate the dragons, but I think it's possible as well, because they don't really use metal, and we see, like, the beastmen of Farum Azula using metal. I think you might be able to argue that, like, their meteoric ore is metal, but I kind of view it more as, like, obsidian. Like, the harpoons that they used aren't, like, manufactured. They seem fashioned, if that makes sense. Like, they're just kind of, like, found objects that they've whittled down to be used as a tool, rather than something that's been, like, forged or smelted or anything like that. And then he said something else here. I can't think of what it was.
So perhaps the traces of them we can find above ground indicate a different fate. Maybe.
All right, yeah. The other thing that I wanted to point out was, it's really fascinating to me that the Claymen have sorcery-style bubbles, whereas the Oracle envoys around Lanedell in retail and the Halig Tree area, their bubbles are incantations. So that's just a very fascinating difference between the two, because at first they might seem related, but there's actually a surprising amount of differences as well.
Maybe they aren't gone from the world, and have simply found a way to integrate themselves into the lands between as we know it now. Without more information, we can never truly know. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Elden Lore. What do you think the lore implications of the Claymen's presence are? Did these former priests allow themselves to be made into clay abominations in an attempt to save their society? Or is the statue of the elongated man that of a king who forced this change upon his subjects to save his dying throne? There are no wrong answers, since we can't confirm the truth, so please speculate wildly in the comments.
I think the little bit about the dude being a king is a little bit of a stretch. I don't necessarily think it's wrong, but I don't think there's quite enough to fully agree with it. But I still think he's obviously a very important figure for the old dynasties. Scalweezy, nice to see you again. Welcome into the stream. You wonder what a SpongeBob Soulsborne name would be? That kind of rolls off the tongue. SpongeBob Soulsborne. You already got it. You already nailed it first try.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss out on any of our lore dives. We look forward to seeing you again for more Elden Lore.
That was a good video, very well produced, with the Square Table Gaming channel. So we might look into some more of their videos later. Alright. SoulsBob Spongeborn? Maybe. All right. So next we have a very highly requested content creator with the Tarnished Archaeologist. And I've seen a couple of his videos because the people in the Discord are very big fans of Tarnished Archaeologist, and they like to talk about his videos, and I felt way out of the loop with what they were talking about, so I indulged and actually watched other people's content, and so I've seen a few, like a handful of their videos, not completely everything. I have not seen this video of the Misbegotten, Omens, and Grafting, an origin story. I will say I do appreciate Tarnished Archaeologist's approach to lore. I do think that they tend to fall into a pitfall of overly relying on the visuals of the games, where I'm not entirely certain we should place as much value on them as I think they need at times. Well, I said that terribly. I think placing too much value on the visuals doesn't work as well as it should, because FromSoft tends to reuse a lot of assets, and that just kind of muddies the lore sometimes, because it's kind of difficult to tell if something is supposed to be actually significant or if it's just reused because they are saving on production costs or just overlooked things, and we don't really know the full story. But nonetheless, I do really appreciate a lot of Tarnished Archaeologist videos. I'm already subscribed, so very interested to see what they say about the Misbegotten, Omens, and Grafting. So let's go ahead and dive on in.
Just outside the eastern rampart of Landell, past the inner wall, amidst the ash cover.
Alright, I hate to pause it so early before he even really starts talking, but I'm like, wait a second, is this a Tauntaun situation? What's going on here? Okay, alright.
Just outside the eastern rampart of Landell, past the inner wall, amidst the ash-covered remnants of the rampart, a striking scene is unfolding, and one that, while initially easy to overlook, one scene is impossible to forget. Here, a collection of misbegotten, until this point in the story only framed as repulsive and pitiful pariahs who were subjugated by the current order, and who are most notably seen in Castle Morn, hacking their former masters limb from limb, are seen here doing something we've never seen them do before. They're praying.
I think that's technically wrong. Well, on the surface level, he is kind of right, because they're not like on a mountain of corpses. I'm pretty confident in Castle Morn, the ones on the mountain of corpses are in this pose as well, or at least a few of them are. I think I have footage of it. Let me look real quick. And I actually hope I'm wrong about this, to be honest, because otherwise... So yeah, this dude isn't exactly hacking. I don't think I zoom out on this clip, but I don't think that's terribly different from what they're doing right here. Let me see if I have another one. All right, so maybe they're more cheering and not necessarily praying. Let's compare that. maybe if he gets closer, it'll be easier to tell. Although I should also have footage of this area. Let's type that in real quick. Or let's not. I'll let him go on with this so far. But so far, I disagree with this premise right here. And this goes back into what I was just saying a moment ago, that sometimes it's a little bit unclear if things are meant to be relevant to the story or if they're just kind of reused assets. And this one, I feel, is just a little bit arguable, because you might be able to say, well, maybe these Misbegotten were placed first, and then the Castle Morn ones are the reused assets. So it just becomes a little bit of a snafu trying to discern what's supposed to be relevant sometimes with visual design. But nonetheless, I've always appreciated these kinds of observations, even if there are civil disagreements. And like I said a moment ago, I would have loved to have been wrong, because that would have just been a cool new idea to me. Anyway, Astanek says, in the back of Castle Morn, there are some that seem to be praying. Yeah, okay. That's more like screaming or boasting. The one praying is using both hands. There is one next to the sword saint statue, as he calls it, and that one seems to be praying a bit more. And we also have some Misbegotten over here by graves. So I definitely think he's half right here, or maybe more like 75% right. But this is not the example to use right now. And you might switch it up right here.
A group are found praying to a set of graves, with a perfumer overlooking the scene. Some appear to be crying or praying to the perfumer itself. And most provocative of all, a single scaly Misbegotten is seen praying to a saint statue.
So Astanek says there's one in the back area praying at Castle Morn. So let me go back to my footage, because I should have that somewhere. I don't know if I have it beforehand here. I know that's too far in. And so to economize on the space of my disc, I did actually get rid of my first playthrough of Elden Ring that has literally all the footage of everything. So I don't think I have more detailed footage available on hand. I do have it backed up on an actual hard drive, but I'm not going to worry about that for right now. But I might go back and look to see if Astanek is correct, and they do have this kind of pose in the back area. Because I think I know what you're talking about, right before you go down to the Leonine Misbegotten. Let me just double check one more time. Yeah, I think I skipped it because this was in my second playthrough, so I skipped a lot of the less important stuff. Anyway, thanks for bringing it up. We'll look it up sometime.
This is one of the most evocative and, frankly, startling scenes in the whole game. Not for its bombast, but for its understated intrigue. Who are the Misbegotten mourning? Why here? And, most importantly of all, why would they pray to a saint statue? The answers to these questions will completely change how you see these forsaken creatures, their role in the greater story, and the central narrative of Elden Ring. Let's start by briefly reviewing what the game tells us explicitly about the Misbegotten. The winged Misbegotten ashes tell us, quote, "The Misbegotten are held to be a punishment for making contact with the Crucible, and from birth, they are treated as slaves or worse," end quote. This text establishes that Misbegotten are born this way, not transformed, consistent with the meaning of their name. Misbegotten, meaning they were...
Between it being misbegotten and the paint me like your French gal pose, this is just some peak accidental comedy material right here.
sired or conceived incorrectly. So already we have a hint that there is something interesting about their heritage, or at least how they were produced. We know from Perfumer Tricia's ashes that they are considered impure, like the Omen, and that at least some perfumers tried to purify them, which helps to explain the presence of the perfumers in that opening scene outside of Laendel's rampart. The Crucible Scale, Feather, and Knot talismans all read, quote, "A vestige of the crucible of primordial life. Born partially of devolution, it was considered a signifier of the divine in ancient times, but is now increasingly disdained as an impurity, as civilization has advanced." End quote. These descriptions are quite informative for a few reasons. For one, the game makes it clear that these features used to be considered divine, but are now considered impure, indicating there was a time during which the Crucible was revered, a fact further attested to by the mere existence of the Crucible Knights, who, by the way, seem at least partially allied with the Misbegotten. Second, one of these vestiges is called a knot. Unlike the other parts that appear in animals, knots don't. They do, however, appear on trees.
I think this might be an English thing. I'm pretty sure like the knot is more like a reference to like a growth or a tumor, at least in Japanese. Noto. I typed in the wrong thing. Okay. Let me look it up real quick and then I'll like G-show it for you guys. Okay, I'll do the full like thing right here and then I'll break it down further. Oops. So this is Crucible right here, and then this is our next character. So Melting Pot is Crucible, and then Kobu is bump or lump or protuberance or swelling. Do we have... Alright, so we don't have like a very good idea of what this is just by the words. So let's do an image search. So I don't want Chinese stuff, so I'm just going to be like Poa. Oops. So yeah, it's definitely not necessarily like a tree knot. But again, this is me looking at the Japanese side of things, and I know the Tarnished Archaeologist doesn't look at that, and I don't blame them because they don't necessarily know Japanese to have this context. And to be fair, I think there is the argument of the death of the author and that the English version of the game should stand alone. So this is just a little bit of a fundamental mismatch in the way that we approach lore. So I don't necessarily think that like the Tarnished Archaeologist's approach is wrong. On the contrary, I think it is perfectly valid the way that they are approaching the game. It is just different from the way that I approach the game. And so I don't think that they have to think the way that I do. So nonetheless, I think that's important details that other people might be interested in. So that's why I share it on my channel here. Death Note, though. Indeed. Okay.
Keep that in mind because we'll return to this point later on in the video. For now, let's just point out that many of these so-called vestigial features of the Crucible are actually draconic in nature. The Misbegotten have dragon scales, dragon tails, and even wings.
It's kind of funny that we're watching this video. Earlier today in the Discord, we were talking about the Misbegotten and the Crucible, and I said that I think it's possible that the denizens of the Crucible may have been getting draconic powers because it might have been a shift of the time away from the dragons ruling things and taking the quote-unquote life with, or the power within the dragons, their vitality, whatnot, and just kind of blending it in with everything else. So I think he's probably on the right track by saying these seem like more draconic traits, even though it's arguable that like not everything that you would see on like a Misbegotten comes directly from a dragon, or at least like an ancient dragon, because like the ancient dragons don't have feathers, but the modern ones do, which is kind of funny. So as the talismans say, these are the results of de-evolution, so they become more bestial, I guess, as a product of the Crucible, perhaps. Dragon tails, thanks, Teen Sith. All right, Chubby Owl, thank you for swinging on in, and be safe swinging on out, and good luck with your exam tomorrow. Take care.
The Misbegotten are chimeric creatures, in fact visually inspired by hybrid taxidermy, the so-called art of combining different animals into a stuffed, mixed chimera. The practice became historically prominent in the Age of Exploration, when expeditions were charged with bringing back evidence of exotic new species. As it turns out, some of the more sensational claims of discovery were in fact the creative designs of the taxidermists themselves, rather.
Hey guys, it's Godwin, the Fiji mermaid. So I didn't know about the other, like the origins of like the hippogriff looking like thing. So I appreciate these kind of direct references. I guess it's not really a griff with a fish tail, but yeah, I didn't know. Oh, it's a Capricorn. I should read sometimes. I didn't know about these specifically. I don't necessarily think like the devs pulled from this specifically as much as it is just being like a cultural, a cross-cultural icon, really. Like you have stuff like this in Final Fantasy. So does anything, or like even the Mega 10 series, or sorry, Shin Megami Tensei, or like the Persona games, like this has been a long mainstay fantasy cornerstone of just like society. And you could even like tie it back to like Dungeons and Dragons and Tolkien and other things, but certainly this might have been the origins for all of those, but I digress. I think sometimes this is getting a little bit too far bogged down in the details for my liking in terms of like lore analysis. But setting that aside, I just really like these observations and knowing more about them in general. And I do think calling themselves like the Tarnished Archaeologist does a massive service for like my understanding of like this kind of stuff in general. So I appreciate it, even if I like am not fully on board with it.
Stuffed mixed chimera. The practice became historically prominent in the Age of Exploration, when expeditions were charged with bringing back evidence of exotic new species. As it turns out, some of the more sensational claims of discovery were in fact the creative designs of the taxidermists themselves, rather than of runaway Darwinian isolation. The Misbegotten appear as just that, with mixed appendages of human, draconic, and bestial elements. While the different flavors, or species, if you would, of Misbegotten are each informative as to the details of their own deep lore, and perhaps actually reflect individual specific creation events, we will focus today on the Misbegotten as a group, rather than on the individual subtypes. In that regard, we should appreciate that they are chimeras with appendages from different species, that they present with aspects of the Crucible, and that those named aspects of the Crucible correspond to draconic body parts and tree nuts.
I would agree with everything up until like the tree nuts part, and one like little contextual piece of information that I didn't say earlier, just because I didn't know if they were going to go into it. Not that I expected them to go into the Japanese specifically, is that the Misbegotten are called more like the mixed race in Japanese. I should have it like pulled up somewhere, right? I guess it doesn't. Okay, it doesn't call them Misbegotten in the talisman description directly. Winged Misbegotten ashes. All right, so let's pull up our handy little G-show again. So this is the term for Misbegotten. So Konshu, well, so it doesn't have like a direct like dictionary correlation because it's a kind of like made up word. So Konshu, like kon is like to be, oh, it says it right here, obviously, like to be mixed, to be blended, or confused. That's kind of what I like immediately think of when I see this. It's like confused. And then this technically means seed, but it's also used to denote like species, as it says right here, or like the kinds of things. So they are a mixed kind, essentially, like, or a blended species. That's kind of what Misbegotten means in Japanese. I don't think Misbegotten is like the best way to convey that in terms of like textual messages, but at least visually they do very clearly look like chimeras or chimeras. Damn it. I used Alt F4 instead of Control W. I'm going to need to pull up the video again. My mistake.
Fair enough so far. But to dive in further and uncover the real story of the Misbegotten, we need to draconic.
So I think Tarnished Archaeologist is on the money by saying that like these are chimeras, and it's a little bit clearer in the Japanese is kind of what I'm ultimately getting at, and I just wanted to give you guys that bit of extra context.
Body parts and tree nuts. Fair enough so far. But to dive in further and uncover the real story of the Misbegotten, we need to untangle some of the metaphorical specifics through their real-world allusions. And for that, we need to draw on, once again, how tree biology and arboreal practices are used as literalized metaphors of lineage and birth in this land of magical sacred trees. We've previously invoked crown sprouting and copsing, clonal sprouting and serotiny, all phenomena linked to tree life cycles and forest management.
So yeah, I didn't know about crown sprouting until I saw Tarnished Archaeologist's video, and that was a very insightful video that they made. So, like I've said before, while I don't necessarily agree with everything, I still do think there's a lot of value in these kinds of observations, and they've helped me out. So, just giving credit where it's due while I can.
In this episode, we will invoke one more. A pretty significant one that will not surprise you. To understand the Misbegotten and the other creatures that display features of Elden Ring's deep past, we need to talk about grafting. Plant grafting is a technique whereby the connective tissue and circulatory system of one plant is merged with that of another plant, thereby creating a sort of hybrid entity. The upper new part is typically called the scion, while the plant onto which the scion is grafted is called the rootstock. This can be done with the same species, of course, but is often done to combine a scion selected on the basis of its fruit production and a rootstock selected for its hardy roots. A typical example of this would be the production of citrus. All commercially farmed citrus fruit, from pomelos to limes and everything in between, come from chimeric trees, where the fruit-bearing part of the tree is a different species from the rootstock, like a delicious lemon tree grafted onto an unpalatable but hardy Japanese bitter orange tree. This produces a fusion of body parts into chimera that gives advantageous aspects of specific appendages from different species. Of course, in Elden Ring, there are abundant allusions to grafting, most notably Godric the Grafted and his grafted scions. But the role of grafting in Elden Ring's story goes far beyond these superficial allusions. You see, as we've elaborated on extensively in our Cycle of Life trilogy, in Elden Ring trees are not merely metaphorical constructs for lineage and descent, but are literally the conduits through which genetic propagation occurs.
So, like, another translation note is... Hold on, let me pull up the name for the grafted scion, the full name. And this might be, like, a little bit of a coincidence in English, but I think it's a brilliant example of, like, localization going well. This is the full name of the grafted scion, so this is like the second half, so we can ignore that for now. So this first part means like a grafted tree, so it's just kind of a grafting, so grafted, and then... Damn it. This is a young nobleman, which happens to be called a scion of a noble family in English. So it's kind of a crazy, serendipitous twist of fate that scion, in the sense of a noble family, also works for Scion in terms of grafting. But I mean, it's not that crazy of a coincidence because that's like literally what a Scion is. Like it's an offshoot. So that kind of makes sense. It's just kind of funny how that works, that like grafted Scion specifically works on 2 levels to reference like tree grafting. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up because I think it's just kind of neat. Feel like Marge Simpson right now. Teen Sith says Scion was a pretty brilliant choice in the English localization for the grafted enemies. I agree. Stella, nice to see you again. They do that with apple trees too because it's the only way to have that type be consistent across several trees. Yeah, I almost paused it earlier to be like, hey, did you guys hear about the dude who grafts like 100 different apple trees together to have like a tree of 1,000 fruits or something like that? So that stuff is like very fascinating to me. I have known about grafting before Elden Ring, so it's kind of interesting to see how they incorporated it into their kind of game mythos and their in-world universe. Scowl Easy says, you still think Godric would have been cool as a pursuer-style enemy and grafted new things onto himself throughout the game? That's actually a really cool idea that I hadn't considered. He just gets more random stuff onto you, or onto himself. Yeah, that would be really cool. Elder Gustav says, apparently an old edition term for the Misbegotten were aberrations. That's true. Now this makes... I kind of wonder what aberration really means in English. So, and sometimes like it's a little bit unintuitive, but one of the more nuanced things of translation comes from like knowing your native tongue better well. So it's a departure from what is normal, usual, or expected. Deviates from the normal type, that's kind of close. Converge at one focus because of limitations or defects in a lens or mirror. So aberration is kind of close to like what they were going for, like the Misbegotten and like whatever, they're like the mixed species in Japanese. So like aberration isn't quite there either, Misbegotten isn't quite there either, but I'm not exactly sure what's better. So I'm not trying to like criticize them and say they should have done a better job. Like it's a very difficult thing to localize. So there's a bit like hits and misses. So I would say like grafted Scion, they knocked it out of the park. Misbegotten, they did what they could, you know? So that's just kind of one of those things.
People are born through the Erd Tree and are recycled back to its roots when they die.
Oh yeah, and this is for context for anybody who hasn't seen some of his other videos. He is of the opinion that the Erd Tree literally takes in like the remnants of people and gives a literal birth to a new body, I guess. Whereas I'm not entirely on board with that. So let's let me back it up slightly just so he could like say his thought.
Elaborated on extensively in our Cycle of Life trilogy, in Elden Ring, trees are not merely metaphorical constructs for lineage and descent, but are literally the conduits through which genetic propagation occurs. People are born through the Erd Tree and are recycled back to its roots when they die. So grafting, the addition of a foreign and genetically distinct scion to an existing lineage, is quite a useful construct to imagine the competing lineages for power in Elden Ring. To take just one example, the Golden lineage, Godfrey and his offspring, is just one branch of the grand genealogy tree of Elden Ring. Grafting, then, to fuse the arboreal and genealogical metaphors, would be the co-opting of the old genealogical lineage and infusing it with new genetics. So now the question is, what is grafted onto what? What's the scion and what's the rootstock? As it happens, you probably already know about the rootstock of Elden Ring's world. Like we've mentioned previously, and is quite apparent when exploring the vast catacomb system in-game, the root system of the Lands Between is far more extensive and ancient than the Erd Tree, which is merely the latest incarnation of a sacred tree, though we'll return to the specific case of the Erd Tree in a moment. This root system stretches from the northernmost tip of the mountaintops to the southernmost tip of the Weeping Peninsula, and is, we are told, one giant contiguous root system. Here is the rootstock of the lands between. What's odd about this ancient rootstock of the lands between, which is so ancient and so vast, it is essentially the foundation of this world, is that it apparently used to produce, well, coniferous trees. All of the dead spectral trees in the mountaintops of the giants are coniferous, seemingly all destroyed by some great catastrophe, like a great forest fire, and the resulting new growth shrubbery is just setting in. In the Altus Plateau.
Yeah, the spiritual trees have kind of piqued my interest. I'm not entirely sure what to make of them yet. Man, the assets for the Mirage Tower are just so goofy from a distance. Anyway, ADHD moment, I guess. Let me go back to see what he said about the trees again.
It apparently used to produce, well, coniferous trees. All of the dead spectral trees in the mountaintops of the giants are coniferous, seemingly all destroyed by some great catastrophe, like a great forest fire, and the resulting new growth shrubbery is just setting in. In the Altus Plateau, there are only two types of trees, the older conifers, many of them withering and sickly, juxtaposed with the brilliantly autumnal deciduous trees.
I think that's a really good observation that I hadn't made myself, so I'm going to try to pay more attention to that in like subsequent playthroughs and stuff. And one of the things that has like that I've tried to pay attention to are like the kinds of trees in Fair Missoula, because I don't think they fully matched anywhere else. So hopefully he goes into that in this video. But yeah, I hadn't considered about like the so-called like evergreen type trees or ever orange trees and the other ones there. But are they necessarily older? Wouldn't that make sense just because that's just how the life cycle of a normal forest, that the conifers are going to be older because they're evergreens? I'm not a botanist. I should look into this a bit more, I guess. If regular sap can heal you, what could the thick stuff do? Teensis says, remember when you went on that conifer rabbit hole a while ago? Not really, to be honest. I'm sorry. The evolutionary path is older for conifers. Small waxy leaves are very early. Yeah, so that's kind of my basic understanding, and I think like that's going to be the case for most forests, even in real life, that these are going to be amongst the tallest of trees, because that's just kind of like what they evolved to do, whereas like these ones are typically going to be a little bit shorter and make more of like a canopy for a forest than these things, and they would like fill in the gaps where like these didn't grow. But anyway, trees for the forest, I guess. We'll see.
Juxtaposed with the brilliantly autumnal deciduous trees. And most suggestively of all, the old reliefs of what we've called the Great Tree clearly shows a conifer, inspired by the ancient Norway spruce known as Old Gico, whereas the Erdtree relief is clearly deciduous. So the rootstock used to produce conifers, but now the dominant form is that of an angiosperm, a deciduous tree.
Let me look up angiosperm real quick, because I don't know my trees super well, and I have looked into the Erdtree. I've wondered whether or not... So the issue with the Erdtree itself is that it doesn't actually have like a one-to-one comparison to a real-life tree. So an angiosperm is a flowering plant that bear flowers and fruits. So pines bear seeds. Are they not considered fruit in this context? They include all forbs, grasses. Oh wait, I should show it for you guys. They include all forbs, grasses, and grass-like plants, a vast majority of broad-leaved trees, shrubs, and vines, and most aquatic plants. So what's the difference between a conifer? They're a group of cone-bearing seed plants, a subset of gymnosperms. Gymnosperms? This is like TV tropes where you just find one hyperlinked word and you just follow all of them until you know absolutely everything about nothing useful to anybody. A plant that has seeds unprotected by an ovary or fruit. Gymnosperms include conifers, cycads, and ginkgo. Damn it. I'm going to have to like look into plant trees. Anyway, no, okay, so this is the kind of stuff that I normally do in the feverish wee hours of the night. Not literally, but where I just kind of go down these rabbit holes when I'm like looking into this stuff. So damn you, Tarnished Archaeologist, for making me do it again. But I won't do that on stream just because I know how I can get with just like following things to their most extremes. So let's just not do that on stream.
Actually, not just any deciduous tree. The Erdtree and its
Teen Sith says pine cones aren't fruit. You're not wrong, but I mean, there's the difference between like the fruit in like the scientific term, I guess, or like, you know, the difference between like what a fruit really is versus what you get at a grocery store. Because like tomatoes are fruit. I don't understand it super well, like, but and anyway, really getting off topic there. It is 5:27 in Scotland. Okay, it is the wee hours of the higher plane.
not just any deciduous tree. The Erdtree and its progeny, including the minor Erdtrees and the new growth on the Altus Plateau, are quite specifically beech trees.
So again, I don't think that's entirely fair. Sure, they might look like them. They might have had some like visual influences taken from beech trees, but when we consider like how the main golden tree, the big Erdtree, the great tree, whatever the hell you want to call it, has the Erdtree seeds that don't really match up with anything in nature. It's kind of hard for me to just kind of be on board with that. So with the golden seeds, is it not opening? There we go. With the Erdtrees producing these, it kind of makes, and like these don't really match up to anything, it makes me leery about just taking these kinds of claims at face value that this must be a beech tree.
The leaves of the Erdtree match quite nicely with the leaves of a beech tree. The seeds of the Erdtree even bear a passing resemblance to the seeds of a beech. Beech trees, like the Erdtree, produce precious sap, which is boiled down into syrup.
I think that's fair with the sap stuff, but I don't think it's actually a cypress tree. Let me put it somewhere in the Discord, I think. A long time ago, or maybe it was just in the DM with somebody else. I can't remember the term that like a tree that loves fire, but I think a beech tree isn't that type of tree. Phytocyte, right? Pyrocyte, right? Pyrophyte. Pyrophyte with a Y? Pyrophytic tree. Okay. So I found my old messages. I don't remember if I posted a photo of like other seeds that kind of look like it. Scrolling. Okay, here we go. Wow, that didn't copy. I just did about blank instead of the actual URL that I need. 1 second. Why isn't it pasting? This thing. I think I have some other stuff with it. And what is this from? Anyway, the more closed up the seed, the more resistant it is to fire. But they need fire to clear out the other trees, so that way their seeds can like take root and grow properly. They like fire gets rid of the competition, which is good for the tree, so it can grow. And I think that might be part of what might be going on here with these kind of like real life trees, like these seeds, and potentially what we get with the golden seeds. And beech trees, I don't think they have these kinds of seeds at all. Like he just showed one over there. Well, it does have a passing resemblance to the Erd tree golden seed. I don't think it's quite the same. And sorry, I don't remember the actual specifics because this is stuff that I looked at like months ago. And I tend to forget like words that I've only seen like one time. But when I get to like 3 times, I'm pretty good about remembering it. So let me look back at chat real quick. That I've had to like minimize it. Seeds aren't fruits. Okay. Stella says that's why they do controlled burns in some areas like the Black Hills. Yes. And that was something that even like the Native Americans practiced, and like California stopped doing it. And so like they've had such extreme wildfires because they kind of took out like the natural element of wildfires that forests need to replenish themselves. So they've kind of stagnated the cycle over there in California. And so that's what happens. The frenzied flame is taking over. And yeah, and as Teensis says, the controlled burns are good for maintaining soil nutrients. And so it is like a part of the cycle of life in some areas of the world where fire is a necessary component for rebirth. And I think that's kind of the same message that goes along with Melina sacrificing herself to burn the Erd tree. Okay.
Beech trees are quite effectively copsed, as they exhibit robust root sprouting, and most importantly of all, beech trees are the prototypical tree for carving remembrances into, because of their distinctive bark and predictable scars.
Are they being serious, or is this like a joke? Because the timing felt more like it was supposed to be a joke, but I don't know if that's like actually supposed to be sincere. Anyway.
The Erd tree, the tree of memories that stores the remembrances of the bosses we collect in-game, is a beech. The remembrances...
I would disagree with that, but I don't think it's supposed to have a one-to-one comparison to any real-life tree. So I think like trying to pigeonhole it into one thing when there's only like passing resemblances is kind of a disservice to the underlying mythology of like this mystical tree, I think.
Of mighty warriors literally hewn into its trunk, like the memories of so many teenage friends and lovers in our own world. In fact, the association between writing and beech trees in Norse and Germanic cultures is so tight that the word book actually derives from the word for beech tree. The question that arises from this observation is, how can you have roots that used to produce conifers but now produce deciduous, specifically beech trees? Well, the straightforward answer is grafting. It is quite literally the process of growing one species onto the roots of a different species. Of course, grafting between coniferous and deciduous trees is not possible in real life. They're too far apart phylogenetically. But when you're talking about magical golden trees, it's not so great a leap. The emerging story here is that the Erd tree was grafted onto a pre-existing vast rootstock, the roots of the lands between. And interestingly enough, the Elden Ring seen in Farum Azula during the reign of Dragon Lord Placidusax actually shows an extensive root system, indicating that the rootstock was already of paramount importance during the Age of the Dragons. It's no huge leap to imagine that the Farum Azula Elden Ring and its life-giving powers were used to actually produce dragons and beasts during this era, in the same way that the current Elden Ring and the Erd Tree are used to produce people in this era. If that statement is confusing to you, we'd recommend watching our Cycle of Life trilogy. But the TLDR version is that the Erd Tree literally produces people. And if the Erd Tree produces people through the power of the Elden Ring, it's fair to postulate that the dragon version of the Elden Ring produced, well, dragons back in their heyday. This helps to explain why Godric refers to the slain dragon he grafts onto himself during his Phase 2 transition as a, quote, trueborn heir, end quote.
Mighty dragon, thou art a true-born heir.
Likely referring to the fact that dragons come from the original rootstock. This rootstock, which sprouted coniferous trees like the Great Tree Relief, was at one point used to produce dragons. In fact, a neat little potential artistic inspiration for this process may come from the process of making so-called dragon eggs by sanding down pine cones, an art form that has influenced our collective image of a dragon egg and its pop culture depictions, for example, in George R. R. Martin's Game of Thrones.
I'm not sure if this is just like a Western thing. I've never heard of it. I don't know how much like the devs would have taken it into consideration. But maybe making the Game of Thrones reference is the right play to make, because we do know George R. R. Martin had some influence over the story of Elden Ring. But it just doesn't feel that weighty to me to just like kind of fully agree with.
Serotinous pine cones, which need intense heat to open and release their seeds, undoubtedly will remind some viewers of Dany's dragon eggs, which only hatch in the presence of a great conflagration. And just to tidy this connection between ancient conifers and dragons, just as dragons, which are basically dinosaurs, are the far more ancient animal form compared to mammals, so too are gymnosperms, the group including conifers, the far more ancient type of tree, evolving.
Well, maybe if I just watched the entire video rather than trying to fall down lore rabbit holes myself, we would have gotten the answer sooner, right? So, gymnosperms, angiosperms, okay. Flowers and fruits, pollen and seeds. Okay. George wrote the lands between's heyday. Miyazaki and company wrote the present. I mean, I'm just trying to be generous. I honestly don't think George R. R. Martin had as much of an impact as some people believe, is how I would phrase it. Eldegusto said, in the past, Norns didn't actually weave fate. The original translation was they carved fate into the world tree. Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Scalisi asks, if the Erd Tree literally birthed new people, wouldn't we see or get a depiction of how it works? So he did have a kind of reference to one of the thrones, and you can see this all throughout Leyndell over here. So we're at 1637 right now. On them, you have like depictions of people coming out of what's supposed to most likely be a representation of the Erd Tree. So I think that's kind of what influenced his opinion about this. And you can see this in Stormvale as well on some of the chairs there. This is a, fairly reused asset, but all over Leyndell, and I think this is even on banners in Leyndell. I was going to look for it, but it'll just take me too much time for like a very minor detail. Pool says, if people aren't born from the Erd Tree, then what were they coming from, since births were stopped after all? So yeah, I'm not entirely on board with the idea that the Erd Tree was like the genesis of different species, because I think that becomes more problematic when we try to discern the origins of things like the Numen, the demi-humans, Alabaster Lords, and all of their potential relations to like the humanoid Tarnished, Pokemon says, maybe the absence of the Rune of Death hasn't allowed the Erd Tree to bring people from the burials at the roots in the catacombs. I think you're half right. I think the bigger component, and this is speculation, but I would, really argue in favor of this, is that when we look at the root resin description and the deep root map depths description, as well as the third one that I can't think of, one of them mentions how the roots of the Erd Tree is no longer connected to the Great Tree, or like the Erd Tree is no longer connected to the roots of the Great Tree. So in English, that makes it sound like the Erd Tree and the Great Tree are very different things. In Japanese, at a first glance, they also kind of sound like different things. However, there are some caveats to that. And I talk about this quite a bit in a video that I made, my first Elden Ring video, about the Crucible, the Golden Order, and all that, and the Great Tree and the Erd Tree, whatever I titled it. And I even made like a brief short about it. But in Japanese, singular and plural aren't often made explicit. So when it talks about the Great Tree, we do get the Great Tree being a reference to the big Erd Tree in Leyndell. However, that is just called the Golden Tree in Japanese. So Golden Tree is Erd Tree, and most people, when they think of Erd Tree, they're only ever going to think of the big one in Leyndell. However, there are other Erd Trees, technically, with the minor Erd Trees. So with the Deep Root Depths map description and root resin, it might be trying to say that the roots of all of the minor Erd Trees were connected to the Great Tree's roots in Leyndell, and that's a little bit up for interpretation just because the Japanese text is vague, and I don't really fault the localizers for not getting that, because like I've said before, the first time I looked at the root resin description, I thought the Great Tree and the Erd Tree or the Golden Tree were meant to be different things, because that's just kind of how it reads at a first glance. You really need that extra context to come to that kind of alternative interpretation there. Lilith says that you don't believe the idea that there was a previous large tree before the Erd Tree. It's questionable. I do think there's a good possibility that there's a tree. I'm just not sure because there's some issues both if you argue for it and against it. And I'll probably get into that a bit more as we go into the video, because I think he's going to get back to this, like that point.
The far more ancient type of tree, evolving hundreds of millions of years before angiosperms, like the beech tree. So, an ancient coniferous rootstock during the Age of Dragons is quite spot on, actually. So with that conceptual framework in mind, let's return to the story of the Misbegotten. As we've said, they are chimeras, but not chimeras with just any random assortment of features, but rather they have a combination of human, bestial, and draconic features. In horticulture, this is simply known as a graft hybrid or graft chimera, and produces plants with features mixed and matched between the two species. This mixture of two discrete genetic lineages is exactly what can be seen in grafting, and it would seem to indicate that the Misbegotten were born from a sacred tree in an era during which there were both human and draconic lineages. And as it happens, we know exactly what this period was in the lands between. It was the Crucible era. As we've described previously, the Crucible is quite specifically the period of multiple sprouts from a preserved root system after the trunk has been destroyed. If you'll recall, that is why the only known references to the form of the Crucible are to a tree, but the form shown in the Crucible Helm and Siluria's Spear is not just any tree, but the very specific phase of crown sprouting. Each of these sprouts represents a lineage, and creatures born from this period in the lands between would have chimeric features, because its lineages are not clearly delineated as they would be in later periods. So now we know why there are all of these connections between the Misbegotten and the Crucible. The residual draconic genetics of this rootstock explain why, during the Age of the Crucible and its numerous competing sprouts from the rootstock, there would be chimeric, half-human, half-dragon beings born. The Crucible was the chaotic transition period between the original rootstock, which produced dragons, and the grafted Erdtree, which produced humans.
So I think these are very interesting observations, although I think I have to disagree with some things in a little bit of a fundamental level. And while he didn't bring it up directly, I think I'm going to have to directly address it to just give some extra context into things. So I do think it's possible that there is a tree before this form of the Erdtree that we see in the lands between now. However, whether or not it's supposed to look like this tree or this statue's tree is up for interpretation, and I'm perfectly fine with saying that the tree of the Crucible may have looked like this. I think that's, a fair argument you can make, because even the Siluria Spear is supposed to be modeled on that tree. However, this is one of the most contentious points of the lore, and as I said a second ago, he didn't say this directly, but the way he's speaking makes it sound as though he's saying that this great tree isn't the Erdtree. However, I think the way the text works is that even the Silurian tree type great tree should still have technically been the Erdtree, according to a couple descriptions relating to the Crucible Knights sets. So this is an Erdtree representation, but it's different from this Erdtree representation. Why? My idea is that this Erdtree depiction is a depiction of Godfrey's Erdtree. I do understand why he's saying that this should represent the dragons, and he'll probably talk about that a bit more, and I might revise my opinion. But we do know that there is an era before the Erdtree, and during that era, things like the Deathbirds did their stuff with flame, and that might have been what coincided with the dragons, and we'll probably talk about that more in depth later. But too long didn't watch. Summary of that would be there might be depictions of twin birds, which could be related to the Deathbirds and their outer god in Fair Missoula, amongst other places, and they have more potential ties to the prehistory of the lands between that extend before the Erdtree and the Silurian tree might have ever existed. So hopefully that answers some of the questions that were going around in the chat about, do I not think that there was a tree before the Erdtree? My answer is yes, asterisk, no, asterisk, in that this is the Erdtree now, yes, but there might have been an Erdtree before it, and as the Tarnished Archaeologist is hinting towards, this new form of the Erdtree may have been grafted on the old one. I think that's probably a fair interpretation, but in terms of the way the game actually handles the text, there is no direct distinguishing between this Erdtree and this Erdtree, which makes things so much harder to discuss, and I kind of hate it as a consequence of that. So, hopefully that makes sense. Noah, welcome back to the stream. You said, this video made you wonder if Marika and Radigan share one body, if the Crucible and the Erdtree share one body, so to speak. Radigan's hair is red like some Misbegotten, and Marika's hair is gold. And yeah, I think that's a very common question that gets brought up because of these kinds of observations here. All right, Ask Next, thank you for staying in, and take care. We will be uploading the VODs later. The one that I have for Smotown that I edited down should be live soonish, hopefully, but it's just kind of stuck in getting checked by YouTube. And that's unfortunate. Anyway, let's go back to the video.
In the Crucible Helm and Siluria Spear is not just any tree, but the very specific phase of crown sprouting. Each of these sprouts represents a lineage, and creatures born from this period in the lands between would have chimeric features, because its lineages are not clearly delineated as they would be in later periods. So now we know why there are all of these connections between the Misbegotten and the Crucible.
So yeah, going back to the whole idea about producing dragons and the idea of, I forget the term he literally just said, of them being like spread around so much. Wouldn't this imply that the dragons had to have existed in some form to make their essence get passed down to these things? So I do think the dragons predate like the Crucible to some degree, which doesn't quite line up with the fact that there is a depiction of an Elden Ring in Fair Missoula. But I'll probably talk more about that depiction later as we go on. But to just summarize it super quickly, we have 3 different depictions of the Elden Ring, but 2 known eras of the Erdtree. So I think the 3rd era that we don't know about would have been the dragons, which would have possibly predated the Crucible and the Erdtree, or the Crucible/Erdtree.
Residual draconic genetics of this rootstock explain why, during the Age of the Crucible and its numerous competing sprouts from the rootstock, there would be chimeric, half-human, half-dragon beings born. The Crucible was the chaotic transition period between the original rootstock, which produced dragons, and the grafted Erdtree, which produced humans. From this perspective, aspects of the Crucible, that is, wings, feathers, horns, scales, etc., are all aspects of the rootstock. As we mentioned before, there is even a Crucible knot talisman, a pretty explicit reference to tree knots, which form when branches are pruned or die otherwise. And
Alright, because he said something, I mean, I might be misinterpreting what he's saying, but I figured a visual representation might help, because I don't necessarily disagree, but I'm not sure if I'm 100% on the same page as he's saying right here. So this is going to be a really rough drawing of things, and you can kind of envision this as a pseudo timeline, and that'll make more sense in a second here. Let's go with, is this gold enough? Anyway. We got our red golden broccoli looking like thing. Doesn't really matter. And so below this, we could say like these are the great roots. Anyway, so with this era down here, we would have like the Farum Azula depiction of the Elden Ring, which has a bit more of a cross pattern. Man, this is terrible. Oh yeah, we could do this maybe, which is like a more equalized. And so I think he might be implying this is the Crucible era, but I might be misinterpreting that, and he could just be saying like the traits found in the Crucible come up from the roots, which would be like dragons. So let's just do like a really crappy winged thing for like a dragon. Oh god, this is even worse than I imagined I could ever make it. And it's got extra wings because it's an ancient dragon, right? Anyway. This is our ancient dragon, a D. The funny thing is I made that stupid drawing because I was like, oh, my handwriting on MS Paint's going to be even worse. So we have the draconic stuff coming from the roots. And then from the roots, it goes up into the Crucible era, where we have Godfrey's depiction of the Elden Ring. Hold on. I actually have icons for this. I have photos of all of this stuff. What am I doing? Sort of. Seal. So this is Godfrey's depiction of the Elden Ring, which is the same as the Golden Orders to a degree, but different. So we have like a tree type symbol in the background, which is kind of similar to what you see in Fair Missoula, but this one is not a cross pattern. It's more like a triangular feature shape. And then this is the Golden Order's seal, which is Radigan and Marika's most current form of it. We no longer have a depiction of a tree, and I think this represents the Golden Order. So let's pull up the video again and my MS Paint stuff. So let me do this. So we have our cross depiction of the Elden Ring. And then we have our like triangle depiction. So I think there's like 3 distinct eras, and I'm not sure if he's saying that this bottom era is the Crucible, or whether or not this era is the Crucible, or if he's saying like both of them are. Whereas I would say that this era is like Fair Missoula stuff and beyond, and like beforehand. And then this era is Crucible, and this is Golden Order, if that makes sense. So hopefully that will establish like where I think things fit in and be a little bit clearer as we go on. Pokemon asks, did the dragons worship the Greater Will in the Elden Ring or something different? So it's pretty implied that they did have some relation with the Greater Will due to the Cinque Dea description, which says that the beasts were granted intelligence by the Greater Will. Although, well, yeah, that doesn't necessarily say anything about the dragons directly, but we do know that the beasts also venerated dragons. So it seems like a roundabout way to confirm that there was a connection to dragons in the Greater Will, because we have beasts in like the dragon temples of Fair Missoula. It's unclear if they had the Elden Beast though. Yeah. Okay, so we do agree on the eras. Thank you, John Bailey. And welcome back to the stream. Oh, you said something earlier. The phantom trees are conifers. Noah says, so different levels of the tree are from different eras. Is that what you're saying? Maybe. I'm not entirely sure about the roots. I would personally... Yeah, I'm not sure about the roots is what I'll say. I don't know for sure.
The surrounding tissue grows around the base of the former branch. Of course, the Crucible era, like all else, was fleeting, and the refinement of this period of multiplicity into a single golden lineage is what is shown in what we have called the Crucible statues, which line the Grand Imperial Road, are found within the capital city, and even the Round Table Hold. A specific subtype of grafting called bud grafting requires pruning of the rootstock branches after the scion has been successfully grafted.
Those are suckers. Here I pinch them off. It's important to remove these suckers from the rootstock, as they could eventually take over and crowd out the grafted variety if left alone.
So it's no surprise that these statues show the tending of one scion from a crown-sprouting rootstock, a scion that is shown in its sister statues alone, after pruning all of the other shoots, to facilitate
So this is something I found out very recently when I was looking for videos to add to the playlist. Sekiro Doobie has shown that there are some like gigantic heads in the files that have the same shape as this thing, although they have like burn marks on them. So this thing was pretty explicitly burned, although that's kind of content, so take it with a grain of salt. So there is a relation between like fire and this gal, who is potentially sheltering a scion, as the Tarnished Archaeologist asserts, which I think is an amazing observation.
Facilitate the growth of the golden scion. This statue is a depiction of grafting, specifically of the golden Erd tree onto a pre-existing rootstock, one that was associated with more draconic features than human, and ultimately the pruning of all of those non-Erd tree branches to leave a single golden scion. The vast human corpus of grafting techniques includes a variety of ways in which to foster grafted scion growth while suppressing the endogenous features of the rootstock. Medieval manuscripts lay out these processes and the use of a variety of tools to facilitate this process. Invariably, grafting is achieved by fostering rootstock health while suppressing the growth of its own shoots. In plant physiology, competition between sprouting branches is quite explicit and happens through plant hormones that are secreted from the tips of growing branches. As these hormones travel down the vasculature of the tree, they actually inhibit growth of other branches. This is the reason why pruning the tips of branches stimulates growth in other parts of the tree. Pruning removes the suppression, called apical inhibition, exerted by the robustly growing branches. These same principles are applied, of course, in grafting. While the rootstock is usually hardier and would often outcompete the grafted scion, because humans want the scion to grow and produce the specific lineage of the graft rather than the rootstock, tenders will prune rootstock shoots to promote the growth of the grafted scion. Likewise, an excellent substrate for grafting is right after a tree has been felled, all apical inhibition fully removed, and the stump, disinhibited while still having a healthy root system, sprouts out in a flurry of new growth, known as crown sprouting. All shoots being disinhibited is the perfect environment for grafting, and this is exactly what happened in the magical world of Elden Ring. After the felling of the great tree comes the Age of the Crucible, a flurry of new growth around the great tree's remaining roots and stump. Echoes of this may be found in a double entendre of the Old Fang description, which reads, quote, "These multiple overlapping fangs grow from a single root. Perhaps they are a vestige of the primordial crucible." End quote. During this age, the golden scion is grafted onto the crucible, creating a graft chimera containing both draconic rootstock shoots and the grafted golden shoot. As this graft integrates, the shoots of that rootstock, as in real grafting, were removed, thus giving the golden scion the full benefits of nourishment from the rootstock without any growth inhibition from its competing branches.
Alright, so I don't know if they're going to go back to this idea, but I think it's kind of worth mentioning. Well, I think there's some really cool observations. A couple things give me pause to like fully support them, and that this stuff with the Crucible is pretty explicitly linked to Godfrey and Horaloo and his time of the Erd Tree, because like the Crucible Knights became followers of Godfrey, and you might be able to argue that he subjugated the Crucible Knights and they came before him technically. I just don't think that's very likely. And so the way that I look at it is the Crucible time is synonymous with Godfrey's time, which is the Age of Bounty. And part of my rationale for that comes from the crests that appear on the Crucible talismans, or not talismans, incantations. What are they called? So we have the aspect of the Crucible Breath. So in the background here, you can see the Erd Tree thing, which is related to Godfrey's time. The Crucible Tail. So this is a lot clearer. which just kind of goes back to my goofy picture of it being looking like a cross. We also have roots down here, and these are darker and might actually hint that, of course, this one could have been grafted on top because it's golden, but we also do have like dark roots in the background here, so it's kind of hard to say what it's really supposed to represent. And then another one with the crucible horns. And going back to that idea about that stuff relating to Godfrey, if the golden scion lineage and whatnot didn't happen until after the crucible was established, why is Godfrey / Hoarah more humanoid? What separates Godwyn as a scion of the golden lineage from Morgott and Mohg? Is he younger than Morgott and Mohg? We don't really know. You might be able to argue that. My general feel of the character of Godwyn would be that he's kind of like the oldest child because he wasn't banished away. But of course that could be argued that the reason he wasn't banished away was because like he was like the perfect child, the literal golden child. So setting that aside, like Godfrey's appearance is just like the real wrench in the machine here of making a lot of this stuff fit together for me. Because the America stuff you can hand wave away by saying that she was a Newman, and maybe Godfrey's a Newman too. We don't really know, but we do have instances of other civilizations predating the Erd Tree that look humanoid by going back to the Old and Erd dynasties as well. So I think there are multiple examples of very humanoid figures that predate the stuff relating to Godfrey and America. So I wouldn't necessarily buy the claim that like humans came from the Erd Tree, because we have things predating this era that show humanoids. Okay. Oops, not trying to do that. When they talk of the Erd Tree bounty, what did people get from the tree anyway? It was sap. Fruit. It was the sap, something people use for food or cooking. It seemed to be the sap that it would just like... Yeah, I'll just say sap. I don't want to go too deep into that. Pokemon said, did the mysterious figure burn down the other sprouts to save the single bud? So this mysterious figure? Possibly. I think it's more likely the original tree got burned down, so that way maybe scions could have been grafted into it to create a new order, because that's kind of what we do when we become the Elden Lord. Like, we burn down the tree, we brandish the ring, and then we start a new era, and then the Erd Tree itself reacts to what we do. So maybe there have been multiple Erd Tree type trees in the past, but they might not have been Erd trees always. And what I mean by that is the idea of an Erd tree or a golden tree might have only been incepted with Godfrey, and there could have been a great tree beforehand, but the great tree went on to become the Erd tree. So talking about this stuff is really difficult to keep terms straight as a result of that. Do I think Newman is a play on the words new men? Maybe in terms of localization, yes, perhaps. But it's also like a Latin thing? Or no, I'm thinking of Empyrean. Anyway. Doesn't Godfrey have connection to the Beastmen through Sarash? Yes. But he subjugated the Beastmen, so the Beastmen were off doing their own thing, and then he came in. So yeah, it's really weird where like the Beastmen and the demi-humans fit in, especially because like the Beastmen were granted intelligence and stuff, and they felt their wildness slip away as like civilization took hold of them.
To reiterate, this is the process we are shown in the Crucible statues. It is the essence of the Crucible, the primordial form of the Erd Tree, a grand grafted beech tree onto a vast coniferous root system. Echoes of metaphors of cruelty of different peoples in the corpus of human history are clear in this story, and in a way beautifully conveyed through the subtle yet powerful metaphor of trees. But grafted trees do not persist in perpetuity, and neither did the Erd tree. Not only does the initial grafting phase require the selective pruning of the undesirable branches, those that display elements of the original rootstock, but because the rootstock is a stable feature of the chimera, in time a grafted tree will produce sprouts from the original rootstock, known usually as root suckers. This is how you can get the seemingly counterintuitive scenario with a grafted citrus tree that is growing thorny sprouts with misshapen leaves from its base, literally a different species growing from beneath the graft. These roots.
All right, that's a really interesting observation, and from this you can extrapolate that these could be the thorns that refuse all and be related to Radagon. So would that imply that Radagon was like the original will of the Erd tree? I don't know, but I don't think he's implying that. I'm just kind of extrapolating from what he said here.
Rootsuckers, which display the features of the original rootstock, not the grafted scion, are considered omens of ill health of the plant, because it is an indication that the apical dominance of the grafted scion is waning, its growth is stunted, and with a bit of poetic license, its age is ending.
So him calling it an omen here, is this like an actual literal term that's used in English? Or is this just like artistic liberties being taken right here on Tarnished Archaeologist's part? I wish I knew for certain, because I wouldn't necessarily think that at first, and I'm probably going to like try to look at the Japanese side of Omen real quick, because I don't remember if it has any connotations like that. And of course this could just be like an English thing, and it might not have like any bearing at all in Japanese, but again, that doesn't necessarily diminish their work here.
Allowed to flourish, rootsuckers will sap the nutrients
it is used
from
like
the
this?
graft,
Okay, thank you,
causing
Lilius.
fruit to suffer, and ultimately replace the overground growth of the tree with the original species. Some of you will by now know where we're going with this. The omens of Elden Ring, artistically inspired by a real human condition known as a cutaneous horn, display features of the original draconic rootstock, like horns and tails, and
sorry to keep pausing so often, but yeah, I forgot what it was. It's really straightforward in Japanese, and I'm pretty confident it's not going to have those kind of implications that the English might have with calling them omen. So this might just end up being a coincidence, but omen comes from emikul, which is like an unwanted or a shunned child, like a child that you'd have out of wedlock, or an unwanted one, a bastard. I guess that's pretty straightforward. So, man, I thought that was a really cool observation. Unfortunately, I don't think it fully pans out. Still really cool nonetheless, though.
and they are literally omens of ill health of the grafted Erd tree. They signify that the tree is not healthy, and they are the organism's attempt to produce new branches from its rootstock. The emergence of omens in the world of Elden Ring would no doubt have been met with scorn and disgust, not just because of their physical appearance, but because they are undeniable evidence that the Erd tree's age of plenty was ending. Once the omen appeared, the end was clearly nigh. Though the
Oh yeah, you guys are saying it's really weird that they went with Omen for English. This might be a case of George R. Martin having influence over the writing of the game, because we do know that the term Erd tree, or the Lands Between, was originally like made up by George R. Martin. So maybe the Omen functioned the same way, and this is kind of like English to Japanese to English, or English to English, and then like the Japanese just kind of like filled in for it. But if that were the case, it'd be interesting that the Japanese went with emikul. But yeah, I don't know if there'd be like a good parallel between this tree omen thing that I don't really fully understand in English quite yet. I'll need to like double check it after the stream or something. or, more realistically forget about and never think about again. But anyway, I'm not sure. And that's kind of like one of the worst parts of like looking into Elden Ring lore specifically, is we always have this veil of maybe it was George R.R. Martin after all, Puppy's throwing a little bit of a fit. Anyway.
These unwanted rootsuckers may be pruned at first. At some point, the health of the tree is unsalvageable. Indeed, the common attempt to quote-unquote cure omenhood, simply cutting off the cutaneous horns, is akin to clipping the thorns from unwanted rootsuckers, a superficial but ultimately futile solution. And just to come full circle on this channel's arboreal musings, a typical way to solve the problem of rootsuckers, if you can't pull them out individually, would be to cut or burn down the whole tree, and to start the process all over again. Take it back to the crucible stage and regraft. And as it happens, that is exactly the plan that some within the Golden Order had.
Sorry, I was totally dealing with the dog, and I didn't get to pay as much attention to that as I wanted, but I also had some thoughts, and I kind of forgot them because I'm monologuing right now.
Is unsalvageable. Indeed, the common attempt to quote-unquote cure omenhood.
Oh, right, with like pruning the omen horns. I think that's a very fascinating parallel, but I'm not sure I would agree with that entirely, just because the way that
cutting off the cutaneous horns is akin to clipping the thorns from unwanted rootsuckers.
The way that these horns work in Elden Ring with the Omens specifically is that they contain the curses, which are most likely extraneous life from the Omen. So maybe you can make the argument that their bodies are supposed to be one way and their personhood is different, but I don't really feel like it comes across that way. And I said that terribly. Let me try to re-say it.
A superficial but
Omens might have been like animalistic at first and not have like the presence of mind to be more human-like. And so the gnarled part of their body might have been like the natural part, and then this part is unnatural and causes them suffering as a result. I think you might be able to make that argument. I just don't think that works super well with their visual design. I feel like the Omen are their own thing, and then like the horns and stuff are extra stuff, kind of like how the Misbegotten have extra limbs and appendages. I think these things are like comparable to the knots of the Crucible knot talismans. Cutting horns sounds terrible. Yeah. Lilia says, to be honest, the way the lore talks about the Omen does suggest that they think this is some kind of physical blasphemy against the Golden Order. Well, that's because their horns have curses in them, and curses are like pseudo-spirits that can't return to the Erd Tree, and they have the ability to stop others from returning to the Erd Tree. And my rationale for that, and this is very heavy speculation, is that a curse is a mass of negative emotions, and it's a very common Japanese trope, and even a Western trope, that a reason that a spirit can't pass on to the afterlife is because they have deep-seated grudges or unfinished business which keep them bound to the material or physical world. And I think that's kind of what's going on with this. So the way that Dung Eater curses other people is a little bit more explicit in that he takes the cursed horn of an omen and puts it in a person's viscera, their like inner organs. And I guess that's enough to like keep their soul stuck to the world. And it's because their soul gets infected by these kind of negative emotions. So they can't like, they get too attached to what's going on in the physical world to fully pass on. And again, speculation, but I think it's a pretty good theory. if I do say so myself. Pat, pat, pat.
Ultimately futile solution. And just to come full circle on this channel's arboreal musings, a typical way to solve the problem of rootsuckers, if you can't pull them out individually, would be to cut or burn down the whole tree, and to start the process all over again. Take it back to the crucible stage and regraft. And as it happens, that is exactly the plan that some within the Golden Order had. So, to summarize what we've discussed so far, the Farum Azula Elden Ring displays the draconic rootstock, which is associated with the coniferous great tree. Outside of Farum Azula during this period, the great tree reliefs and saint statues are the predominant iconographic features. At some point, the new Elden Ring, the one that represents the Erd tree, is grafted onto the rootstock. This is followed by a period of multiplicity known as the Crucible, during which there are sprouts from both the original rootstock as well as the grafted scion, the Erd tree. But this period of multiplicity was ended by the pruning of the other sprouts, leaving only the single golden Erd tree, and its life-giving power was then harnessed to produce a new type of creature, the golden-haired people of the golden lineage, with none of the draconic features that marked the prior age.
So, I understand where he's coming from, I'm pretty sure at this point now, but I might be a little bit off basis, so just to go back to our silly little thing, I think I would disagree with what he's saying, though, because he's saying that the Crucible came later, and then from that we got the golden lineage further on down the line. But hold on, let me rewatch this so I could... The
one that represents...
Right, so he makes it sound like this symbol came after the Crucible, whereas I would make the argument, that this symbol of the Elden Ring, even though it's kind of upside down now, I guess that makes sense. I always thought it was a little bit weird. Anyway, I think the Crucible is synonymous with that version of the Elden Ring. And so I think in the Tarnished Archaeologist view of things, he takes the red portion of the Crucible tree and like combines it with the roots, whereas I would disagree with that, and I would say like this is where the Dragon Age ended with the root portion, and then Godfrey with this kind of depiction of the Elden Ring created the Crucible. So I don't think the Crucible is meant to be different from the root, or sorry, I do think the Crucible is supposed to be different from like what the Tarnished Archaeologist would say like the root period is. And I think the golden scions came into being during the Crucible potentially, or maybe they could have existed beforehand. We don't really know when Godwin was first born. I think it's possible he could have been born before the Erd Tree was a thing, and maybe he was like the golden scion after all. I don't really know, but after that happened, I think the next Genesis era of the Erd Tree comes from Radagon appearing in the scene and sealing the Rune of Death to create the Golden Order, which does use almost the same symbol of the Elden Ring as you would get in the Crucible, except it doesn't have the cross shape, it has like the triangle shape on the outside. So hopefully that makes sense. And you can see my rationale for things.
Since the Erd Tree is grafted onto the rootstock. This is followed by a period of multiplicity known as the Crucible, during which there are sprouts from both the original rootstock as well as the grafted scion, the Erd Tree.
And so just to reiterate why I think that is, I don't think we have Misbegotten along with the dragons over here. I'm just going to like, okay, this is really bad dog. I was trying to make like a humped back person like the Misbegotten. I can give it wings, right? Terrible wings. I don't think we had Misbegotten with dragons. I think, if anything, they came into being with the Crucible. And once the Golden Order came in, they got rid of their Misbegotten boys because they no longer represented what people were supposed to be. If that makes sense. So, Misbegotten bad, people good, but I think Misbegotten came in around this time, and people probably also existed to some extent, because we have Godfrey down here, and potentially Godwyn.
But this period of multiplicity was ended by the pruning of the other sprouts, leaving only the single golden Erd tree, and its life-giving power was then harnessed to produce a new type of creature, the golden-haired people of the golden lineage, with none of the draconic features that marked the prior age. Following this, there was, of course, a brief period of abundance, the Erd tree's age of plenty. That era's wane was heralded by the sudden emergence of the Omens.
So again, the Crucible incantations use that imagery of this Erd tree. So this, I don't think we can separate the Crucible from this depiction of the Erd tree. So that's kind of why I have my pseudo timeline the way that I do. Alright, Pokemon, take care.
That era's wane was heralded by the sudden emergence of the Omens, anthropomorphized rootsuckers that displayed features of the original rootstock, and were thus detested by the Erd tree faithful. That even the royal couple, Godfrey and Marika, could produce omens is evidence that no one could escape the consequences of the Erd tree's waning vitality. With this in mind, we may answer the question at the outset of the video. No wonder then that the Misbegotten outside Leyndell are seen praying to a saint statue. The Misbegotten are vestiges of the prior rootstock order, represented by the saint and tree iconography. Likewise, it is no coincidence that the royal omen of the subterranean shunning grounds are found praying to the chthonic libation statue, which, as we've discussed in prior videos, is also a vestige of the prior pre-Erd tree age. The Omens and the Misbegotten, though born in different eras, each display features of the original rootstock, and they long for the era, the Great Tree era and its saints, when they were still seen as having touched the divine.
So one thing to consider is that we do have Misbegotten working with Marika to some extent because of Hugh's promise to her, and Hugh being in the Round Table Hold. And so sure, you might be able to argue that like even Hugh is from an even earlier area, but I don't know that you should differentiate the Misbegotten and the Omen from the timelines, because I don't know whether or not the Misbegotten should predate the Omen in the timeline, is what I'm trying to say, because Morgott and Moog have an Erd tree seal on their seals. They're like shackles. But of course, you might be able to argue the reason why the shackles have the Erd tree seal is because they use new powers to keep them down. But if you make that argument, then you would say the Omens should have been oppressed by new powers, and it just doesn't work out. And it would put them at the same time as the Tarnished Archaeologist is suggesting the Misbegotten should have existed, perhaps. I might be misrepresenting their claims here, and I'm not trying to do that. I'm just trying to, like, fit everything in together. But I don't exactly see it working with Misbegotten and Omen being in different sections of the timeline the way that it's currently laid out.
So, how would these Misbegotten feel when they learned of the plot to produce a new sacred tree, the Halig tree, one that is not just far away, but is completely separate from the pre-existing rootstock? The scene unfolding at the Halig Tree gives us our answer, with the Misbegotten invaders having attacked the Halig Tree town and murdered most of its inhabitants.
If anything, you might be able to make the argument that the Omen must have come first because they're called graceless. Although I think maybe the Misbegotten are also called graceless, and grace should have existed during the time of the Crucible with Godfrey and everything in that Erd tree. I don't know. I'll need to think about that a little bit more, perhaps. Scalisi says, Hugh is more of a tool, but yeah. Omen might be made from the curses and spirits not going through the cycle of life and building up because of how strict America's order is. So the way that I look at it is the Crucible took life and funneled it away from the Erd tree with like the weird like recycling system that it had going on. And then the Golden Order was more or less keeping it in for itself, like the law of regression. So after a while, the way that the Misbegotten were and the Omen were created, it was no longer compatible with that version of the Erd tree. So going back to our silly little picture, I don't know what exactly is going on with the root section. I thought I made it like this. I don't know what's going on in this era in terms of like how life is propagated throughout the lands between. However, I would say with the Crucible, it's potentially taking draconic life and recycling it all the way back out into like Misbegotten and stuff. And by the time it gets to the Golden Order, it stops that recycling system going out into other things and takes from things like Misbegotten, and rather than recycling it back into other stuff, it just stays into the tree, which is how we get our golden Loch Ness monster Elden beast coming out of the Erd tree. Hey, Goddess Spaghetti, nice to see you again. What a chart. It's a little bit too much to explain off the rip. Evil Noah asks, are the Misbegotten based on something from Berserk or something else? Because when you first saw their faces, you were hit with the feeling of familiarity, like you've seen them before, but can't place where. Maybe? Because now that you say it that way, I don't think you're wrong. It might have been Berserk. Because we know, like, Miyazaki and the devs are fans of Berserk. Okay.
This may seem like just a redux of the Castle Morn situation, a servant-class rebellion, but in reality, this appears to be an invasion. That's why we see something called a Misbegotten Crusader in the consecrated snowfields, just outside the Halig Tree. While this may appear to be a mere rebellion, it may actually be a religious crusade. As we've described before, the Halig Tree's entire point is to be removed from the contaminants of the existing rootstock, once that rootstock had been irrevocably corrupted by Godwyn's deathroot. Miquella dreamed of mercy-killing his beloved half-brother and starting a new age, far away from Leyndell and, most importantly, not connected to the corrupted roots. Miquella's fresh...
I don't disagree with any of that at face value, so I think that's pretty fair assessment. Maybe a little bit speculative, but yeah, I think it's good speculation.
Start was ambitious and even perhaps noble, but the Misbegotten, products of the prior rootstock, would definitely not agree. Likewise, Mohg, also contaminated by the ancient rootstock, seeks to divert the amniotic, life-giving power infused by Miquella to create a new root system for the creation of an irredentist draconic rootstock dynasty. Vestiges of lineage and power are not so easily cleansed.
I think that final line right there is a little bit arguable because Mohg's goal was to slake the thirst of Miquella's cocoon. So let's pull up the relevant quote. It's in the Lord of Blood's Exaltation. Let me... So even though I do not recommend Fextra for like the note stuff, I would say like you can use its descriptions and like the pictures there fairly safely. So, render up your offerings of blood to your lord. Drench my consort's chamber. Slake his cocoon's thirst. His awakening shall herald the dawn of our dynasty. So I don't think he's funneling Miquella's blood away unless Tarnished Archaeologist is saying that he's like him taking the cocoon is diverting it. Maybe he means it that way. In which case, I guess you could argue that. But it seems like he's trying to fulfill Miquella's desires to a certain extent, but he doesn't seem to fully understand it. Mohg is hard to get a read on because he might have been charmed by Miquella. We don't exactly know what the end goal of his dynasty is, especially with like the Formless Mother of Blood. And I do think it's a really big missed opportunity to not have an ending associated with either Mohg or Rykard for like their end goals. But they don't necessarily have to. I just think it would have been nice to help flesh out some of the other lore there. Scowleasy says, to rephrase their idea, Omen might be unique to America's Order because of the way it was set up. Omen could have existed in earlier ages, but the Golden Order has the conditions to consistently produce them. I don't know if the Golden Order is still actively producing Omen, and I would kind of disagree with that just because like we do see Mohg and Morgott be children of Marika when that should have happened before her union with Rennala as Radagon. So Omen did pre-exist that. Omen definitely pre-exists the Golden Order is what I should say. But maybe the Golden Order still produces them. I'm kind of skeptical just because like the curse stuff. Alright, so overall, I do think that's a fantastic video. Like I said at the outset, I do really enjoy the observations that the Tarnished Archaeology makes. There's always a lot of food for thought to go along with that, even if I don't necessarily agree with the conclusions completely, which is perfectly fine. And as I've said before throughout the stream, our approach to lore is a little bit different, where I think they are perfectly justified to look purely at the English side of the game. I feel like there's more worth to look at the Japanese side of things. And, well, they might be a little bit of irreconcilable approaches. I think they both have value for like their respective target audiences. So I'm glad that we got to share this off in the stream, and we will also be looking at a couple more of the Tarnished Archaeologist videos as we go along. I also forgot to link the last video that we watched by Garrulous Goldmask, but this is the Tarnished Archaeologist video that we just watched. So if you guys enjoyed the video, go ahead and give it a like and give them a subscribe. And to go back to Garrulous Goldmask to give them some credits as well. This is Garrulous Goldmask's video about the Goldmask ending being the best choice in Elden Ring. So, with that being said, I think this will be enough videos for the stream tonight. We're not doing another 5-hour stream. I'm kind of physically spent out for staying up so late, so consistently. But anyway, I've had a blast. I've enjoyed all of you joining in. Thank you for joining or lurking. I appreciate it. Hopefully we'll see you live on the next one, where we'll be streaming again at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right, everybody. So that'll be it for me for now. We'll catch you on the next one. LastProtagonist out.